Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Ron, is that you?
Yeah,
Hi, good to see you.
I was thinking I should get on early, given, with all the changes that have been made.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I see Jill's on. Hi, Jill.
Hi.
I'm so glad you could make it.
Looks like a number of people are signing up early.
I saw Ernest went through an interesting transformation from Susan Fitzmaurice to Ernest.
Ernest is, I believe, in England. Am I right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
Hi, Ernest.
Hi there. I thought I'd check in because obviously Susan might not. I don't know if Susan's going to be joining us, but also I thought I'd make sure the session is recorded.
Good.
Thank you, Ernest.
And she's also, I'm sure you're aware, having some serious medical issues and about to have an operation.
No, I'm sorry.
Or if you're not aware of that, then yes, she is about to have one. And so I'm not sure if she will turn up, actually. We'll see.
Okay.
Ernest, are you able to serve as the host or designate the host job if Susan can't make it?
I'm the host at the moment, and I can set up, I can be the host, and I can also set up anyone needed to, if you need to do screen share as a co-host, if that's the case, yes.
Brilliant. Yeah, Jim Flannery, our first speaker, will need to be designated as the host in order to screen share.
Jim, what's his last name again?
I'm sorry, not Jim Gottstein, not Jim Flannery, Jim Gottstein.
Jim, I think he's.
Hi, Ernest.
Hi. Oh, right. Let's make you a co-host then. Right. So you should be co-host now, Jim.
Great.
Hi, Jim.
Anyone else who needs to be made a co-host for screen sharing or something like that?
Susan, do you need to be a co-host?
I don't think I do. If we have co-hosts going on, I think I'm good.
Good.
I'm not doing any sharing of screens or anything, so I think I'm good.
Okay, that's fine. Well, this is.
Hello there.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Susan. I wasn't sure if you were going to make it, so I thought I'd join in and set up recording and everything.
Good. I can make it. Turning on the captioning, I'm hoping they moved it. Where did they move it to? You got to put on the captioning.
Yeah, it's not coming up, is it?
Who moved it? Where did they move it to?
Yeah, live transcription. It just says live transcription. I can't see it anywhere else.
Yes, that's it.
Live transcription. It just says assignment doesn't
Yeah, you
overtype.
just, yep, just put that on. Yeah, for some reason mine's not showing it.
Oh, here we go. Is that showing now? It just come up just as I started talking. It now should. You should see it on the bottom of your screen.
Recording.
Can people mute themselves when people start talking?
Somebody really needs to your phone and
Right. Linda.
You can go to participants and mute everybody at once.
There you go. Yeah.
Susan, do you want to handle the muting?
sure.
Hi, this is Ron.
Ernest has been doing great.
Okay. You know, I used to, I should do this the next time we do this. I used to have a recording that I used to play when people were waiting for things to get settled down. It was, everybody needs somebody sometimes, no matter how rich or poor you are, you need someone. It was a song that was recorded by a street musician in California for, it's an interesting story because it was called Playing for Peace, and he gathered all these street musicians from around the world, and they all played together different popular songs, you know, going from Africa to the to all over the world in the different styles. And then he would combine the music from the different people, even though they were in different countries. And I actually had a chance to see the group play in New York a number of years ago. And one of the best concerts I ever saw. People were just so enthusiastic. I'm going to stop talking because I'm losing my voice anyway. I'm got some allergies that are coming up. Somebody else will have to entertain the group.
I think we've only got a few more minutes and we're going to be starting soon, aren't we?
Yeah, people are coming in at a fast pace. So until they slow down a little.
I could play my favorite video that I think describes, you know, what get mental illness. I don't like to use the term mental illness, but the most brilliant thing I've ever seen on it for the pre-show entertainment as people want.
I would go for it.
I don't want to over-romanticize it. But frankly, going crazy was the best thing ever happened to me. I don't say it's for everybody. Some people couldn't cope. But for me, it came at a time when nothing else seemed to be working.
So could people see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. It's a little small. Can you make it to the whole screen?
Yeah, I can try. You want me to run it again? I mean,
Was that the?
Yeah, Yeah, let me make it bigger.
better
One of the things,
Email was showing, Jim.
it's, excuse me?
Yours or somebody's email was showing up, I think, so just giving you a heads up. Now it's gone.
I thought I quit sharing my screen.
Well,
You have, yeah.
something was there.
Oh, a lot of familiar faces are here today.
I don't want to over-romanticize it. But frankly, going crazy was the best thing ever happened to me.
And games, man.
I don't say it for everybody. Some
I'm
people
in the
couldn't cope.
in
But for me, it came at a time when nothing
on the
else seemed to be
video.
working.
See the people. What you need?
Oh, generator.
Oh, okay.
Jim, what is that? I like that.
Who is that? Oh, Angela? Hi, Angela.
I said, what is that from? I like that little.
Yeah, it's Lily Tomlin in Search for Intelligent Life in the Universe.
Ooh, I like.
And you can't get it streaming as far as I can tell. And I tried to record it off of I don't know, VHS or something. And I just think it's like the most brilliant 15 seconds.
I like. That's good.
What is going on?
Who's moderating?
Did I get started? Are we ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Let's see, what do we got here? I would say we should just wait a couple more minutes because we're having somebody come in. I don't know if you hear it ding, but just about every 2 seconds, we've got somebody new joining us. So I would give it a couple minutes and I will monitor the chat. You can ignore the chat. I will let you know if anybody puts something in the chat that needs to be discussed immediately, or whether it's something can wait to a good break.
Thank you. You are the best. It's hard to cover it all. I call that peer support. Thank you very much.
This is Sarah here. I want a special shout out. Thank you to Susan Fitzmaurice for handling the transcription for hearing impaired individuals who are participating today. Thanks for staying up late last night and doing that, Susan. Really appreciate it.
So Susan Fitzmaurice, not me, Susan, just give me the heads up when you want me to start.
Yeah, I'll let you know when. Actually, what we could do is those people who are here, if anybody wants to do a quick intro while we're waiting a minute. If anybody feels like they want us to know who you are, that you're here and present, and that's not a speaker.
Yes. Go
I'm glad
ahead.
to say a little something from outside Washington, D.C. As people introduce themselves, I hope they say where they're located.
Say whatever you think is important for us to know.
Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm in Montreal, Quebec, Canada.
I'm Nolan, St. Paul, Minnesota.
I'm Ernest in England, Hampshire.
Irish.
All the way from England. Okay.
That's close by. Next stop after leaving the.
I'm Erica Cadup. I work for a Center for Independent Living in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
I'm Carol Morbizi, and I live in Pennsylvania, and I'm very glad that Susan asked me on a mailing list. Thank you, Susan.
I'm Mary Van Pelt from Alamosa, Colorado.
Lori Mendelson. I live in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I'm a human rights and disability activist, and I identify as somebody with the lived experience of mental illness.
I'm Elliot Pinsley. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. I'm the CEO of a new nonprofit policy center called the Behavioral Health Foundation, which focuses on advancing mental health. And we're primarily focused on Tennessee. Right now, we are in the middle of really trying to express concerns to a legislature that is trying to put assertive or assisted outpatient treatment in place in Tennessee. And we are trying to see if we can be another one of those states that keeps holding out. So anybody who's got the best stuff on that, if you want to, I'll put my information in the chat, and anything that you can send me would be helpful.
I'm David. Sorry. I'm David James in Pueblo, Colorado.
I'm Athena McLean. I've been researching abuses in psychiatry and in nursing home care, in dementia, cognitive issues forever. And I've also experienced it firsthand with very close family members who ultimately succumbed to the system's failures.
Hey, I'm Ann Courtney, and I'm in Loveland, Colorado. I'm just here to try to learn more, definitely about informed consent, mostly for a family member. And so I'm just really, really appreciative that you're having this this Zoom project going on here, and just would like to, like I said, engage and learn more about what's going on. Thank you.
My name is Jill Kesty. I'm from Michigan, Upper Michigan, actually, Northern Michigan. And I run Coalition to End Forced Psychiatric Drugging on Facebook. And I'm currently on an assisted outpatient treatment order. It's my third one in the past 3 years. And I feel like it's been torture, and trying to do whatever I can to help psychiatric survivors and other people in the CSX movement.
My name is Angie Peacock. I'm in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm lived experience, but I trained as a social worker so I could learn their language to fight them back. But I'm not getting licensed to protest, but I do talk about these issues worldwide with a film called Medicating Normal. So if anybody organization needs a film that can act as a vehicle to bring these issues in a gentle way, I'll put my email thing. I'll connect with the guy in Tennessee for sure. But the film seems to be doing something because it's, you know, it's gentle.
I'm Michelle Lifshin, and I work at On Our Own of Maryland, and we're a large statewide behavioral health peer-run organization with 23 wellness and recovery centers that are entirely peer-run. And right now, echoing what Elliot said, we're really pushing against. Currently, they're looking at assisted outpatient treatment, but right now there was just a bill introduced to broaden the dangerousness standard to include gravely disabled. And so we're really trying to push back against that. So similarly, any resources, I'll include my information in the chat, but any resources would be really helpful. We're struggling because in our state, even if it doesn't get passed as a bill, it can still be passed through regulations, and they're really, really interested in getting those regulations passed. So we're concerned about that. And I'm very grateful that you guys organized this. Thank you.
You've just succeeded Mike Fink.
So I am the Director of Network and Peer Services. The new Executive Director is my boss, wonderful lady by the name of Katie Rouse. So she's the new Mike, but nobody could really be, nobody can replace Mike Finkel. He was incredible.
On that note, I think we'll move on a bit. What I suggest any and all of you to do, if you want to do some networking, is to put your email in the chat. We have your email, but others here don't. So if you want to put your affiliation in so people know where you work or whatever pertinent information you think would be helpful for anybody who might want to reach out to you. You can put phone numbers in, you can put whatever you're interested in terms of networking. That's part of what this is all about. It's not just about us presenting to you, it's about you supporting each other.
How to do that again?
Well, you're here.
Cut down below, Ron, there's a button for a chat, and you can put it in there.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Chad, I have a blog called Angel of Mercy Big Pharma, and I've connected the dots, and I'm investigative journalism exposing Big Pharma for what it's worth, and collaborated with Dr. Carl Elliott at the University of Minnesota in the alleged suicide of Dan Markuson that got me. Third leading cause of death is prescription meds.
And now we may be having forced vaccines with a platform that is untested and gives me pause while everybody is lining up for it. So, you know, it's continuing in many different venues, and it's hard to ordinary public to ignore it at any rate.
Ms. McLean, I didn't get the first part. What did you say was this thing that's being done?
I was just saying now the vaccine is being rolled out.
If I may have a word, I'm Scott Norman Rosenthal. I'm very controversial. I have a bizarre, best way to put it briefly is I'm on a bizarre part of the autism spectrum, really bizarre. I've been, not well accepted. I've been treated unfairly, including in the movement. But I saw a lot of issues coming. I was marginalized over statements that now are being repeated by some of the same individuals. That's about all I'm going to go into on that. But as far as the vaccines, I've got an appointment. And, I see a lot of things in our culture as actually feeding into big pharma. So and also the encroachment. Back in my day, many people were conscious. You can have physiological problems that are not mental illness, such as mine, that shouldn't be seen that way. They're physiological. When you're marginalized, it makes you behave irregularly because you don't know where to turn. There are no resources available. And now I think that we overemphasize that mental illness is this thing that's palpable, whereas all human behavior is variable, varies. And again, it seems to tie into this monster that just wants to keep pumping drugs, pumping drugs in schools into children by any means they're able.
Okay, Scott, we're going to get into that later.
So shall I get going here?
Yep. Yes, you should get going here. But I'm going to first do a little lead in and then I'll hand it over to you.
Sure.
So this is co-sponsored. MindFreedom International is one of the sponsors, and they are working with I Love You Lead On, which is the organization I started. And I Love You Lead On is led by folks with disabilities from all walks of life. It's people with every discernible disability, allies, people from different marginalized population within the disability community. And it's an attempt to create a space where everybody feels safe. You can go for it, Susan.
Thank you. So I'm glad you did that because you were much more eloquent about the Love You Lead On than I would be. And I was going to ask you to do it anyway, so that's perfect. But first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Susan Musante. I sit on the board of MindFreedom International. I, with a number of people, helped start up a Soteria house in Alaska, which unfortunately is no longer open. But one of those people, really the prime mover, was one of our presenters today, Jim Godstein. So I'm pretty excited to be sharing this meeting with him and everybody else that's here. I heard so many really great things already, and we haven't hardly even started. So one of the things I want to just say is my other claim to fame is that I worked very hard in New Mexico with a coalition of people to fight, and I'm not going to call it assisted outpatient treatment because that just feeds into assisted outpatient treatment. So I'm going to call it what I think it is, which is forced outpatient commitment, coerced outpatient treatment, and in a lot of ways, outpatient drugging. So that's how, and we were successful in New Mexico for many years, and then we lost the fight a few years back. So I claim Alaska as my home, for those of you who want to know, but I also claim New Mexico as my home, and when I can't afford to live in Alaska anymore, I'm going back there. So anyway, so I'll just start by saying that I wanted to add that. So I'm glad to be a resource. Also, a colleague Al Gales, I don't think he's on today, but if he also is on the board of MindFreedom and worked very hard in advocating against forced outpatient treatment and developing alternatives. So those are contacts, and I'm glad. I'll put my email in after I'm done. I haven't done it yet. So first of all, I want to welcome all of you to Judy's Room, which, as Susan already said, is a collaboration between MindFreedom and I Love You Lead On. And today's session is the third in a series that is addressing rights, informed consent, and how we can protect ourselves. So we have really great presenters today. I'm so excited. But before I introduce them, I'll just tell you a little bit about MindFreedom. So MindFreedom International is an independent group with no funding control by governments, religious organizations, major corporations, or mental health systems. The mission of MindFreedom is to lead a nonviolent revolution of freedom, equality, truth, and human rights that unite people affected by mental health system with other movements for justice everywhere. And obviously, this is a result of that collaboration. Some notable recent activity include this Judy's Room, the Shield, which I'm not going to speak about because I know, I'm putting it up here, because I know that some of our speakers are going to address that. We also have recently, so much activity over the years, but recently Voices for Choices, chronicling the journey of healer and activists and individuals about their experience with force in the health system. So on our website, we also host a library of information and resources, and we also have a directory of alternatives and providers listed by state who share MindFreedom values. But anyway, for more information, I point you to our website, which is really simply mindfreedom.org. That's mindfreedom.org. And if you like what you're hearing today and you are not a member, I encourage you to go to the website. There's a portal to become a member or to renew your membership. And also the portal to accept donations, because as I said, we're really funded through our membership and donations primarily. That's our main source. So, but I'm so glad to have you all here. And
Susan, I don't mean to interrupt you, but there's somebody, Naomi, can you mute your phone because it keeps flipping between Susan and Naomi because she's not muted.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Got it? Are we good? Am I still here?
I think you're good now. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So that was my plug for MindFreedom, which is a great organization, and I'm proud to be part of it. So, okay, so we have three presenters, Jim Gutstein, Sarah Smith, and Ron Bassman. And we're going to ask each of them to speak, and then we're going to open it up for questions and comments going forward. So if you can hold your verbal questions and comments to the end, that would be great, but feel free to enter them into the chat box that Susan and I, the other Susan, will try to keep tabs on. So let me go forward. I'm very pleased to introduce Jim Gutstein. Jim is the author of the Zyprexa papers, a must read, and he is a must read and the founder of Psych Rights, whose mission is to mount a strategic litigation campaign against forced psychiatric drugging and electroshock. I've known Jim for some years now, and I can tell you that he is relentless in his public education efforts, his strong commitment to the people and the causes he represents, and the development of alternatives to the conventional psychiatric system. So without further ado, Jim, come on.
Thanks, Susan. That's a very nice introduction. Let me try and share my screen. Uh-oh.
Green button in the center.
Yeah, no, I know. Is that working okay? Can people see it now?
Not, I didn't see it yet. Not yet. Oh, there it is. I see it.
Okay, thank you. So first off, an apology. A brain fart on my part. I forgot to put in "I love you" lead on this slide. So that's not an intentional slide. And I think that "I love you" lead on has been doing great work, and I really appreciate it. And then before I start, what I call it is community drugging orders. So anyway, so I'm going to talk about rights, basically constitutional rights in the United States. And I think that's it seems like a logical place to start. But I want to say the title of, I wrote a law review article in 2008, Involuntary Commitment and Forced Psychiatric Drugging in the Trial Courts, Rights Violations as a Matter of Course. So I'm going to tell you about all these rights, but the reality is they're largely ignored or violated by the system. And so, but at the end, I'm going to talk about, a couple other things to, try and help with that. And I think from my perspective, that's a really great thing to talk about after the presentations is how do we get, people's rights to actually be honored. So the first thing is most people I think have heard of due process, and there's two types of due process, but one of them is procedural due process, and you have the right to meaningful notice and a meaningful opportunity to be heard by a neutral decision maker. And the reason why I bring this up is because I think even at this level, people aren't given these rights, especially the meaningful opportunity to be heard. I mean, I'm going to plug my book. In my book, I talk about how in Alaska, petitions for psychiatric imprisonment, which is really what we're talking about for involuntary commitment, and forced drugging, petitions are filed in the morning usually, or often, for hearings to be held that afternoon, multiple ones, and one attorney is handling them, and it's just not a legitimate legal process. Of course, when I did them, it wasn't like that at all. And then substantive due process is this idea that if you have a fundamental right, such as free, free speech or the right to be free from imprisonment, for example, in order for the state to be allowed to take them away or deprive you of those rights, it has to have a compelling interest to do that. And it can only do that in the least restrictive or least intrusive way, or another way they phrase it is it's got to be narrowly tailored to meet the objectives. And so I think that's, when you talk about really challenging these things, that's one of the things that's really important. Because you can bring up, soteria house, open dialogue, hearing voices, peer respite, those kind of things. So it's been held by the U.S. Supreme Court and in Alaska Supreme Court that involuntary commitment or psychiatric imprisonment is a deprivation of a fundamental right. So those requirements are applied to psychiatric imprisonment or involuntary commitment. It's not, let's say, 100% clear that forced drugging, the right to be free from being forced to take drugs is a fundamental right. But the way things have gone, I think it's almost there that it's been declared a fundamental
for
right.
me. Oh, well, sorry. I'm gonna interrupt you, sir. Have a great day. All right, man, you're good.
So involuntary commitment is, under the US Supreme Court, is permissible when confinement takes place pursuant to, wow, that's a redundancy there. Takes place pursuant to proper procedures and evidentiary standards. So that's where the idea of notice and an opportunity to be heard comes in, and evidentiary standards. I mean, one of the things that's pretty lax in these cases too. And then, and this is what everyone's heard of. There has to be a finding of dangerousness either to oneself or to others, and that the proof of dangerousness is coupled with proof of some additional factors such as mental illness or mental abnormality. And another way that it's phrased is that you're a danger to self or others due to, being, quote, mentally ill. So, I mean, one of the things is that basically psychiatrists, psychologists, whoever, cannot accurately predict who's going to be dangerous. So my estimation is that no more than 10% of the people that get locked up for being mentally ill actually meet commitment criteria. And then there's this other category called gravely disabled, or it's phrased different ways in different states, but the idea that you're so incapable of taking care of oneself that you're a danger to yourself. And that's also been held to be a danger to self. And the US Supreme Court has said if you're incapable of surviving safely in freedom, then you can be locked up for that. I don't know what that means exactly, but anyway, that's that. Okay, then forced drugging under the US Constitution, there's a case called Sell versus United States. And in this case, it wasn't the typical civil commitment, forced drugging in connection with civil commitment or a community drugging order. It was whether or not he could be drugged to be made competent to stand trial. And in order to be competent to stand trial, you have to be able to understand the nature of the charges against you and to assist your lawyer. And Sell was a dentist, and he was accused of Medicaid fraud. So the Supreme Court basically said, and if you look at these, well, I'll just go through them, that in order to drug someone to make them competent to stand trial, you have to show that there's an important governmental interest at stake. And what they said is, Medicaid fraud maybe isn't that high. I mean, can you drug someone, for trespass to make him competent to stand trial, as opposed to someone who committed murder? And so that's kind of the point there. Okay, then they say you have to, the forced drugging has to significantly further those state interests. So in other words, that it's going to make the person competent to stand trial. So in other words, that it's substantially unlikely that will to have side effects that will interfere significantly with making the person competent to stand trial. Now, one of the things, as an aside, was it Jared Loughner, was it who shot Gabby Giffords and all those people in Arizona 10, 15 years ago? Well, he raised this in his trial, trial to, on those murder charges. They wanted to drug him to make him competent to stand trial, and he raised this, and so he was successful in not being drugged for a while, and then finally they did. And then there was this report of it, and so before he was drugged, he was obstructionist in the court, and talking all the times, and not behaving. And after he was drugged, this newspaper reporter remarked, well, he was able to just sit quietly for 8 hours during the trial. And so that was, that to them showed that it made him competent to stand trial. Well, of course, he was just, drugged into zombiedom. And that is really the therapeutic, the so-called therapeutic benefit of these drugs, is to make people less problematic for people or disturbing to people. And then it's got to be, the drugging has to be necessary to further those interests. The court must find that any alternative, less intrusive treatments are unlikely to achieve substantially the same results. So this sounds a lot like the same sort of analysis that you undertake to determine whether or not, when a right is a fundamental right. So this is one of the reasons why I say. And finally, it has to be medically appropriate, that that the drugging has to be in the patient's best medical interest in light of his medical condition, considered on a drug-by-drug basis. So, and if you think about, all these things, let me see what my next slide is. Oops. Yeah, if you think about, what I've just gone through, I mean, you can see that this is not the reality of the way that, these cases go. So then what to do about it? So Psych Rights Law Project for Psychiatric Rights, on its homepage, psychrights.org, has this forced drugging defense package, and it's a set of legal pleadings to challenge the forced drugging based on these principles that I just said. And it has affidavits from Robert Whitaker, the author of Mad in America and Anatomy of an Epidemic, Dr. Peter Gertcha, who wrote, what is it? I think it's Deadly Psychiatry and Organized Denial. And Dr. Grace Jackson, who testified in some cases and has a couple of books out, Rethinking psychiatric drugs, I think it's called, and drug-induced dementia, perfect crime. So these are affidavits that you can use in support of the motion. And technically, you're supposed to have certified copies, and you can get them from MindFreedom. They like if you're a member, I think for, I don't know, maybe $25. Although I think they, you know, if you can't afford it, that, you know, they'll work with you. The other thing is advanced directives. I mean, the basic rule on why the legal principle behind why they can force you to take the drugs against your will is you're not competent to decline them. Well, and so the idea of an advanced directive is that, well, I've signed this set of this, it's essentially a power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney, and when I was competent, and therefore you have to follow those wishes. And one of the things that I recommend is that you get some kind of person, hopefully with impressive letters after their name, like MD or PhD, PsyD, to certify that you were competent at the time. Because basically, if you get hauled into the hospital, they don't know what to do other than drug you. I mean, if they can't drug you, they don't know what to do. And so they'll find any reason to try not to. And so one of the ways they can do that is say that you weren't competent when you signed it. So if you have someone that has signed, you know, has certified that you were competent at the time, then it's pretty hard for them to go back and say that you weren't, because, you know, they weren't there. I've had someone tell me they thought that's kind of demeaning to, you know, raise that question right on the form, but I kind of take the go in favor of the practicalities, and I think it's stronger. Now there's a this website, the National Resource Center on Psychiatric Advanced Directives, that has state-by-state information on the effectiveness of them and forms, and you can get that. And then the last thing, which I'm really pretty excited about, is the MindFreedom Shield, which Sarah Smith is, I think, going to talk about, so I'm not going to talk that much about it, but it's a, you know, it's a self-help, another self-help way to really try and challenge forced drugging and psychiatric imprisonment. So that's basically it.
Thank you, Jim. So apparently my internet's a little unstable. I cut out. So if I cut out, someone will have to pick up, but right at the moment I'm back in. So thank you so much. And we're so glad to have you here. So as I said, we're gonna have our presenters, then we're gonna open up for verbal questions and comments, but keep people are already writing in the chat box, so keep doing that. We're keeping an eye on that. So again, I am really glad to introduce our next presenter, Sarah Smith. Sarah is a member of the MindFreedom team. And honestly, Sarah, I don't even know your job title anymore, because she does pretty much, she's got her fingers in everything. She's pretty much doing everything these days. Well, her and Ron, but everybody's doing everything, but she's just making things happen. So what I do know about Sarah is that she is strong in grassroots efforts and advocacy for human rights. She's a founding member of Rethinking Psychiatry. Prior to her work with MindFreedom, she served as a development director and in other positions for a host of not-for-profits, including Catholic Community Services, Northwest Coalition for Alternatives to Pesticide, Returning Veterans Project, and Community Support Services. She is the mother of a psychiatric survivor. And without further ado, I would really love to introduce and bring on Sarah Smith. Thanks so much for joining us.
Muted. Go. Thank you. I think my job title is known as Jack of all trades, master of none. But I liked your introduction, so thank you. I'm sitting here in Eugene, Oregon, where MindFreedom has been headquartered almost since its inception. I came to know MindFreedom through my friend David Oakes, who was the founding director of MindFreedom International. And I met David in the environmental movement. We were both in different affinity groups that had the intention of getting arrested to somehow commit an act of nonviolent civil disobedience to prevent an illegal logging operation in a pristine watershed in Oregon. Some of you may know that Oregon has been in the epicenter of an ecological debate over the best use of forest management. So anyway, that's how I got to know David. And I do identify as being the mother of a psychiatric survivor, and my daughter may not always identify as one, but I definitely identify her as being a survivor. I identify as being a user, a service user, and I've never been on the sharp end of the needle, so to speak. So I have never been involuntarily treated for any mental or emotional issue, but I definitely see myself probably in 25, if not more, of the DSM labels. I went through the DSM out of curiosity one time, and I definitely, I saw myself in the DSM, and I also used an existing DSM label in order to bill my insurance for getting very helpful voluntary mental health counseling, which helped me for several years in more than one, not consecutive years. And the mental health label that my counselor and I collaborated on was adjustment disorder. And that enabled me to get great services, like I say, voluntarily. And I did, with the help of my friend and mentor, David Oakes, eventually I came to convert that mental health label into something that made a little bit more sense to me, like creative maladjustment. So that's kind of how I identify. I also identify as a caregiver, although some people don't like the term caregiver, but I'm going to kind of put that in a little context. My adult daughter is currently on a powerful antipsychotic medication that gives her a lot of side effects. And sometimes she needs help with those side effects, like help flushing the vomit down the toilet, cleaning out the vomit bowl, help making, with basic needs. She does live at home. So although caregiver may not be like a term that some people would like to use, I try to aspire to be the kind of caregiver that really stays out of my loved one's way, of finding her own way. So with that having been said, I just want to, before I also tell my story and a little bit of how I came into the work for MindFreedom, I do want to just have a little disclaimer about medical model language. If I inadvertently, while telling my story, use the term psychosis or psychotic or something like that, I usually, in writing, put little parentheses around there because I mean it in a different way. And if my screen freezes up and you don't see me, or forget that I use it in different contexts, please forgive me if you don't like that word. When I use the word, rarely, but sometimes I find it appropriate, I mean it in a sense of people having an altered perception or a unshared reality an unusual set of beliefs, an out-of-body experience, maybe a dissociation, a spiritual awakening, just maybe intergenerational trauma, just some kind of experience that may be considered on the extreme end of the human spectrum of emotions, and land that person who's experiencing maybe one of many different things might get that label. So I don't use that label lightly, and when I do, it's usually in the context of just being able to, refer to what other people commonly refer to. I hate the word SPMI. If anyone uses that label, immediately I have a negative reaction. I hate words like stabilization and decompensation. I avoid words like that, like the plague. Decompensation, because I have a compost in a garden. I can't conceive of referring to people as if they're like a compost or something, and they're disintegrating before our eyes. I view my daughter as a very whole person. And sometimes I wish we would substitute more applicable words such as psychiatric drug withdrawal for decompensation. Sometimes I think SPMI is really a code word for people that we've given up on, or throwaway people. So I really dislike some social worker terminology, and I try to avoid it when I can. And also the word recovery. If I inadvertently say recovery, I knew that word has sort of been co-opted by some people to mean maybe treatment compliant or highly functional. And I'm not even sure I agree with the word functional anymore, because in a capitalist society, we're all supposed to function by finding a way to be productive and make money for ourselves or someone else. So the word functional is starting to really grate on my nerves. So forgive me for just the disclaimer. I thought I would just put that out there. My first encounter with psychiatry was actually through my daughter, and it was very traumatic for me. And as David taught me as my mentor in the early stages of our family journey, if it was traumatic for me, can you imagine how traumatic it was for my daughter? So on my very worst days, when I may be sitting on a little pity pot, oh, poor me, I'm the mother of a person who's, going through this trauma. I try to think of things from her perspective. And the first traumatic experience that I had was actually the very first time I took my daughter to the ER. And I think it's important to describe what I felt to a degree, and what I saw and what I observed, not to tell her story or co-opt her story, because she's not here to tell it in her view, but to express to you why I work for MindFreedom. And one of the things that I wished I had known 11 years ago as a mother, that I know now, that I wish to convey to as many people as possible, is that the ER is a very dangerous place to take someone who is in a state of mental distress. And I can't emphasize that enough. Our experience at the ER was, in a nutshell, it was very fast moving. It was very fast paced, and the ER is a very stimulating environment with people in white coats who are very professional, and they have a lot of strength. They project strength and authority, and that's intentional. The people who are professionals, the people at the apex in an ER are medical doctors, and then you've got a pecking order, followed by maybe nurse practitioner, and other people below that in the professional medical hierarchy. When you are in a state of emotional distress, you are immediately perceived as being anywhere from inconvenient to disruptive to the operations of that place, which has to be orderly. Therefore, they have conceived in the ERs places of seclusion where you cannot be heard or seen, or therefore create a disturbance for anyone in that environment. Now, some of that makes sense, because if grandma down the road is having very severe life-threatening symptoms, maybe a heart attack, probably the last thing little grandma down the hallway needs to hear is someone screaming. So in a way, I can see why the hospital has to segregate people in emotional distress. But the hospital actually creates some of the very distress that they purport to and one of the ways they do that, my daughter was very calm when I took her to the ER. When she became upset is when she tried to run away, and they stopped her and they impeded her from running away. And then she quickly ended up in 5-point restraints. And seeing my daughter in 5-point restraints in a completely unhinged state of mind was probably the image that will sear in my brain till I die as being the single most traumatic part of my daughter's initial encounter with psychiatry. And my own response, which was not to just go for the throat of the person putting my daughter in response, because I had been taken away from her and asked to fill out a lot of paperwork. And when I saw my daughter in 5-point restraints, I was paralyzed in a state of shock. And when people become paralyzed in a state of shock, they shut down, at least if you're like me, and they don't make good decisions. They don't think very well. And it wasn't until my husband, I had called him on the phone, he was at work, and told him, there was an emergency, he needed to come down. Until he got there, he immediately said, why is my daughter in restraints? Is this really necessary? He was very diplomatic. And immediately the nurse loosened the restraints. And as soon as the very same nurse who had tied my daughter down to a bed and tightened these leather straps just as tight as they would go, while they were forcibly injecting her with a powerful antipsychotic called Haldol, when they were doing that, my husband, after asking, could she be released, the nurse was amenable to that. But it was the same nurse who had tied the restraints down. The same nurse started loosening the restraints. As soon as my daughter was free, she just punched that nurse right in the head, right between the eyes. And my daughter has never been violent ever to me, her brothers, sisters. She never had a history of violence. And to me, that violence was understandable. And I often ask them, and by the way, they called the police. When my daughter punched the nurse, they called the police, and that was the start of my daughter's criminal record because she was charged with assault. So I would like to ask an attorney, well, if she was an assault, but wasn't she defending herself? And what about stand your ground? And, I'm a nonviolent person. I believe in nonviolence, but to press criminal charges when you could make a pretty good argument that it was the mental health provider that did the first violent act. So how much restraint is required for someone who's in a mental state of distress? And if they're being potentially disruptive, aren't there other nonviolent means of restraining individuals and de-escalating people? And to my satisfaction, I learned years down the road that yes, there are people who are very well trained and individually, uniquely gifted with the process of working with people in altered states of consciousness. And there are people who are very gifted with working with people who are in distress, even extreme cases of distress. So that's kind of I without going too much more into my daughter's story, that's really my first encounter with psychiatry. And then before I go into more things that I learned about for psychiatry, things that I wish I knew then that I know now, I would just like to say that in working with for the organization called Returning Veterans Project, my boss taught me something really interesting, and I never knew what she meant at first. She said, trauma lives in the body. And although I didn't understand it for years, I thought about it. I reflected on it. I wonder what that means. Trauma lives in the body. And a curious thing happened to me. And it gave me a little bit of a Rosetta Stone into that concept of trauma living in the body. And here's what I learned. I was told by my sister and my parents that when I was like 4 and 5, I can't remember the actual age, I had an infected chicken pox that developed into this big, ugly, like pus-filled kind of gross growth on my lower back, and it had to be removed, excised. Nowadays, they might probably do it under anesthesia with surgery, but our family doctor, our pediatrician, actually took a scalpel and was digging into my lower back when I was a young child. I was restrained when this was happening, so I wouldn't interfere with the surgery, but it proved to be really deep. And so I had to be taken back several consecutive days. I was taken to this doctor to have this incision. And I was told, I don't have any conscious memory of it, but I was told by my sister and eyewitnesses, including my parents, that I would scream getting into the car, going to the hospital. I would scream, I would freak out because I knew I was going to the doctor and he was going to carve on my back without anesthetics on my lower back. So what I learned was people are capable of forgetting things, because I thought to myself, well, my parents are telling me they observed this happening. My sister told me, but I have no conscious memory of it. So I always thought, isn't that weird? Maybe people block out memories when they're little or something. And then the other day, well, it was about a year ago, it first happened to me. My husband touched me on my lower back when I was lying on my left side, on the side of the bed where I normally sleep. And my husband is very affectionate. Excuse me. He just touched me lightly, just like a feather touch on the bare part of my skin. And oh my God, I had just an off the wall reaction. And then I realized that reaction didn't go away. From that point on, when I started having that reaction, and it only happened when I was lying on a certain side on my bed, when my husband would crawl into bed and just maybe even get close to my lower back, all of a sudden the fear of him touching my lower back again, doesn't matter how gentle he was, just the fear alone that he was going to touch my back made me crawl out of my skin. And it raised my cortisol levels so high that I actually had trouble sleeping for maybe 20 or 25 minutes after I took a deep breath and calmed down. So I remembered going back to what my former boss said about trauma living the body. And I said, oh, of course, that's what my boss meant about trauma living the body. So going back to my daughter's traumatic encounter with psychiatry, we have no idea of what our mental health system, what kind of traumas they are applying to people, exposing them to trauma by forcibly injecting them and restraining them on what could be the worst day of their life when they are the most vulnerable. So I guess in hindsight, one of the things that I would say, and how, in terms of the theme of our discussion today, which is how can we protect ourselves, is first, do no harm. And if a person comes to a hospital or a sanctuary or some place for protection, they are in need of emotional support, back off. Let the process unfold. Let the person who is at the center of concern lead the process. Let them have their agency, no matter how long it takes for that person to get to the point where they can say what happened and what they need. And it may be days, it may be months, it may even be years. And believe me, my daughter was catatonic for a while where she couldn't talk. It is so important not to expose that person to anything that is potentially traumatic. And we have a plethora of narratives from psychiatric survivors telling people, anyone who will listen, professionals, family members, This is what harmed me in the mental health system. I had already had a history of feeling powerlessness, or maybe childhood trauma, or maybe domestic abuse, or racism, or some systemic racism, or on the street, in your face racism. You know, people are exposed to terrible things. And the worst thing of all is that our system has baked into our mental health system and services for people that have mental and emotional issues like my daughter. It is baked in that there is no guarantee that your loved one or you yourself, if you seek services, will be protected from harm. There is no guarantees. There are almost no safeguards. And I appreciate Jim Godstein and everything he said about the laws that are in place. But laws are no good unless they're practiced, and rights are no good unless they are exercised. So that is why I'm with MindFreedom in this office today, is because we have a lot of work to do in terms of organizing and developing our community to the point where we can unify as one movement and unify our voices, and with the primary voices being people with lived experience, not secondary people who have been observers or witnesses like me, but people like my daughter who have been on the sharp end of the needle. These are the people that need to be informing the mental health system and telling the system, back off, you're making me scared. So that's why I'm here. And if I had my druthers, if I had a magic wand, one of my wishes would be to wave into disappearance or wave into transformation the group that is predominantly known as the Mental Health Advocacy Organization, NAMI, National Alliance for Mental Illness. I think that's what it stands for. I'm kind of in exile from that organization. That's why I worked with Marcia Myers, Cindy Fisher, Grace Sylvia, Harry Cook, and other survivors and family members to found Rethinking Psychiatry, because it's time that parents stop forming these little cliques where they get together and bitch about their adult children not staying out of their meds. This is a really tiresome thing and a really poor model for a mental health or aid advocacy organization to found itself on. What we need is the voices of survivors to be dominating the effort to overthrow these unjust practices. And so that's kind of one of my wishes, but the ER is a very dangerous place. And I'm to this day a little bit terrified of taking my daughter to the ER, even if she was running a really high fever, something like that. And I think I need a time check. Susan?
Oh, you're okay. Keep going.
Yeah.
Stop.
Okay.
And plus you got to talk about
Okay.
SHIELD, right?
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you for the reminder.
You're doing great.
Now that I've told them a little bit of my story. Working for MindFreedom, I think I've been working here on and off for about 10 years. And it wasn't until 3 years ago when Ron was hired as the new executive director, because David, those of you who don't know, had a medical retirement. And when Ron took over where David left off, and then the board, with the support of the board, they decided one of the things that had kind of gone into hibernation due to David's absence was to bring up the SHIELD program. And I really, it wasn't really how I saw myself getting involved, because hearing, but I ended up being magnetized to it too, in a way. I found it very kind of healing in a way and empowering. Maybe if, in some small way, the people that are helped to the SHIELD, maybe I will be helped to heal from the disempowerment I felt as a parent, because I was blockaded and from visiting my daughter for many years. I was not allowed to visit her unless the visit was supervised. Sometimes there'd be armed guards because she's been in the state hospital quite a few times. So I want to get back to the shield, but before I do, I also want to say I wish I knew a couple other things. What I know now that I didn't know earlier is that mental health commitment hearings are very bad for your mental health. I wish I could talk to all parents out there and let them know that. And if there's any way that you can save yourself or a loved one from having to go through a mental health hearing, a commitment hearing, do everything in your power. Dr. Lauren Mosier called it a ceremony of degradation. And I believe that's exactly what those commitment hearings are. Yesterday, I attended my first involuntary commitment hearing for one of our SHIELD members, and it was the first commitment hearing I had personally been a witness to since my own daughter's many civil commitments. I think my daughter technically she went through 14 consecutive civil commitments, but of those times, sometimes she waived her right to go to have a civil commitment hearing. And I find that interesting. Sometime I'd like to talk to Jim Godstein about the built-in prejudice, why people are seen as not fit to make their own medical decisions, but they are seen fit and capable of signing a waiver to participate in I don't know, there's so many different ways of looking at it. So I think my daughter just tried to magically make those involuntary commitments go away, and the shame and the degradation that she felt going through those by simply waiving her right to protest. And she tried very hard to protest her involuntary commitments, but she had very poor counsel. So the other thing that I know now that I wish I had known then is people facing involuntary commitment hearings receive generally very poor counsel. And I think disability rights organizations, since we have some of those people here in this meeting, maybe we could discuss this. I think a study was done showing that the average amount of time of counsel received for people facing involuntary commitment is 22 minutes. I'm just thinking 22 freaking minutes to determine whether a potentially harmful and life-threatening treatment can be applied by force to your loved one. It's shameful. So I would say that.
Question, can you answer? Somebody wants to know what a mental health commitment hearing is. Can you describe what the purpose is?
A mental health commitment hearing is when the state has to make a case that you meet the threshold for being involuntarily treated for 180 days, most states. And Jim probably should correct me if I got that wrong. But during that 180 days, you can either be forcibly treated in an inpatient facility, or you can be forcibly treated as an outpatient, like I think Susan mentioned, assisted outpatient treatment, which is an oxymoron, however you say, because it's assisted outpatient treatment by force. It doesn't make sense. You can't have it both ways. So when you are in that 180-day window, if you are deemed to be non-treatment compliant, then you may be the commitment officer in that local community where you live may start the paperwork rolling and get another hearing set up where a judge will be present. I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim Godstein, but the person making the state on behalf of the case, I call him a prosecutor. I guess it's not the same.
Well, it's pretty much, basically they work for the state. Yeah, I don't think they consider themselves such, but I think it's a fair characterization.
What I witnessed yesterday in a person, one of our SHIELD members had an involuntary commitment hearing. There was he had an excellent lawyer and she did a great job. She even actually got witnesses, which you hardly ever see witnesses for the defendant. Like the person who's trying to avoid forced treatment, they hardly ever get to call witnesses. when there's probably a lot of reasons for that. We could talk about that. But in this particular trial, wow, this lawyer actually cared enough to meet with her client more than the 22 average minutes that most clients get. She met with him for hours. She spoke to me. She spoke to his loved ones. She spoke to, she went and got him an alternative mental health evaluator who gave a great testimony to try to counter the testimony of the psychiatrist who was in favor of the state keeping this person locked up for another 6 months to a year, whatever. And the way that it took place, it was so discouraging. A lot of it was really just bullshit. The attorney was the only one who made a good case. The witness, to me, what the evidence she presented made an excellent case for this person deserves to be in the least restrictive environment, according to Olmsted, consistent with Olmsted. And those of you who know what Olmsted is, it's when the Supreme Court tested the Americans with Disability Act for the first time, saying that people should deserve, sorry about that, to live in the least restricted environment. So she made a great case, but it was like the table was stacked against the Shield member. That psychiatrist who did a really bad job. He didn't even remember his client's name or his diagnosis half the time. He kept referring to his notes. It was weighted against the client, and this client was very upset. He did get committed again, and we're working on a shield alert for him. But anyway, I hope I answered that question to Jim's satisfaction and the asker's satisfaction. So what I learned and what I wish I had known is the hospital's one of the last places I would call safe for individuals in distress. And also, if you're in a state that has a psychiatric security review board like Oregon, I would say one of the things I wish I knew now that, well, I never plead guilty by insanity if you can. And that's because our state, the state of Oregon, will go much harder and extend your involuntary treatment orders to decades. So if you are committed of a crime and you use that plea. So fortunately, we were able to convince our daughter to plead guilty for a crime that she was involved in. And I never looked back and regretted that case. So the Shield now is, getting back to the Shield, is a program that MindFreedom brought out of hibernation, and it's a very popular program. And the Shield uses the concept of people power, leveraging people power to expose psychiatric abuse and oppression. And by exposing psychiatric abuse and oppression, you're going to put more pressure on a facility or the director of a hospital or an outpatient treatment facility or whatever to cease and desist from applying or subjecting a person to potentially harmful treatment against their will. So the Shield works kind of on a one for all for one basis. When you sign up for the Shield, you typically fill out a 2-page application. And some of the questions you might recognize as being some of the questions that are in a psychiatric advance directive. We keep that information private, it's confidential, and we keep it at our office. And if you call us later and you are being involuntarily treated, you can ask to activate your Shield. And what we do is we interview you once, twice, however long it takes to get the facts of the matter. And if you're in a state of distress, then we'll give you all the time you need to tell your story. But, we might not get it all at once. So when a caller wants to activate their Shield, it may be 1 day or 3 days, it may be even weeks before we will actually take a Shield and publish a Shield. And by publishing, I mean, we create a campaign, and it's a public campaign. We alert other Shield members, please call the governor, call the administrator of this hospital, or email this person, or send a letter. Do something on behalf of individual A who's being kept against his or her will at facility B. So that's what the Shield is. It's activating people power. And in past Shield campaigns that have been the most successful, reached a kind of that critical mass where enough people got involved that the press finally got involved or attorneys got involved. alternative expert witnesses got involved. So the bet when a shield campaign is effective, that's what we always want. They are not always effective. The shield has no guaranteed outcome, and every individual situation is different. But the best shield campaign is one that actually has an educational benefit to the general public, because the general public just doesn't know about some of the harmful things that my daughter was subjected to. And shield campaigns are really to benefit a person and to really mitigate harm that is happening to real people, but they are also to educate the public and family members. So I think that's about, but if people have any questions, I guess
We're
Susan
gonna
would like
try
to
and
say.
we're gonna try and hold so we can get everybody in. But oh my, Sarah, I've known you not well for a few years, and holy cow, I don't even know what to say. That was so passionate and poignant, and more importantly, informative. I'm gonna say this: there's so many things I want to relate to on what you just said, including, I say this like all the time, if I had known in 1973 what I know now, oh my, what a difference, right? So I'm going to tell one quick story just because I've got the microphone now, and that is, so we talk about the forced outpatient, Jim calls it forced outpatient drugging.
Community drugging orders.
Community drugging orders. Essentially, it's coercive forced treatment in the community, right? It's not that different, because you can go to the state hospital or the jail by not following it. So real quick, so now a lot of states, and we in Alaska, have therapeutic courts. They're supposed to, everybody thinks they're beautiful. That's why the public education part is so important, is because the public thinks these are good things because they're saving people and helping them get treatment. But then they force them into treatments that they may or may not need treatments. I don't want, and some of them aren't even treatments. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So point here is, so my quick story, which is getting longer than it should have, is I was at a therapeutic court meeting with a young woman I knew, and her attorney, court-appointed attorney who was representing her, encouraged her to go to the therapeutic courts. And because I don't know why really, except he believed in them. He was ignorant. That's the truth of it. He was ignorant. And after he almost convinced her and her mother, I said, so if she doesn't choose therapeutic courts, is she going to jail? What will happen to her? Is she going to get probation? What? And he said, oh, the case will likely be dismissed. And I was like, you have to be kidding me. You just convinced her. Because what Sarah was saying, one of the things she was saying is that once you get committed through the court, whether it's through court commitment or you plead not guilty by reason of insanity, or you agree, yes, I did whatever it was for the therapeutic courts, you maybe would have 3 days in jail or no days in jail or no probation, and it can go on for months and months and months. And this I've seen over and over again. So, but thank you, Sarah. That was so informative, really, and well said. So I think I'm supposed to move on here. So finally, last but not least, as they say, because I'm really excited to have Ron speak with us, is we have our very own MindFreedom International Executive Director, Ron Bassman. Ron has done so much in the past couple of years, 3 years. I've lost track of how long we've had him, but he's done so much to help our organization on its journey to lead this nonviolent revolution. And one of the things he has done is made a commitment to join with other organizations who share our values. And, this collaboration is one example of that. I mean, that's why we're doing this Judy's Room with I Love You Lead On. It's like, that's part of his collaboration. So Ron is a psychiatric survivor who was twice hospitalized for schizophrenia. He earned his PhD later on. And I have no more to say, except I really want to hear from Ron, and thank you for sharing your words of wisdom today with us, Ron.
Thank you. I listen and I look at the chat. There's so much pain in this room. And so many of us here have developed a sense of right and wrong and have dealt with the hurt that has happened. And none of us who have been through this ever thought when they were 7, 10 years old, 12 years old, that this would happen to them. They would be locked up. I would have never imagined that I'd be in a seclusion room when I was 22 years old and I'd be screaming at the top of my lungs, "This isn't fair. You can't do this to me. I didn't do anything." And if I screamed for too long and disturbed people, then they would come in and give me a shot in my butt and put me in 4-point restraints. I didn't know any better. Judy Chamberlain, and this is Judy's room, wrote an article that I so much agree with, and we talked about it, which was those of us who were the worst behaved patients, the ones that were most non-compliant, were the ones who either were destroyed or they transformed their experience and became better for it, not because of anything that was done there, but because they had to reach deep into their own gut and spirit, and something kept them alive. Well, I'm not going to talk so much about that. There's so much, but I want to talk about rights. One of my favorite comedians who passed, George Carlin, used to say in one of his riffs, "We don't have rights, we have privileges. Rights cannot be taken away, privileges can. And the ones that don't have privileges or rights are us, most of us in this particular room." So I want to talk about how we can get rights. What are the things that we can do? And it really, Sarah alluded to it, or might even have said it directly. We need to gather together. So we're a force, we're a power, we're a group that people have to notice. Alone, we get locked up. Anything can happen to us. So in the work that we're doing at MindFreedom, we're doing public education, and we're also doing SHIELD, and we're trying to gather together our affiliates in different parts of the country and the world so that we can explain to people what is happening. You know, in terms of what happens to people when they're declared mentally ill, when they're diagnosed, which is really bullshit, the whole diagnostic system, anybody who's studied it knows that. What happens often is because of their behavior might be different, they might look different, have different ideas about things. Typically, they're alone, unsupported. And when somebody's alone, they can be abused. We have the SHIELD project. Excuse my voice. I've been losing my voice these last couple of days. So I'll try to keep going on. In the SHIELD program, we've learned that when somebody contacts us, and they would contact Sarah or other worker at the office, Kelly, and they would explain what is happening to them and how they wanted help. And it was usually being forced to do something that they don't want to do. They're in the hospital. You shouldn't even call it a hospital. It's an institution. And they're being drugged against their will. They're being confined. And they're alone. Their families, if they do have a family that is involved with them, don't understand what's going on. Just like Sarah said, she didn't know what to do when this happened to her daughter. She would know what to do now. My family didn't know what to do. And most of us who had caring families do not know how bad it is to enter into the mental health system. And we learn. Some of us never learn and wind up in a group like Sarah said, NAMI. But those of us who have learned and have transformed their experience, I don't like the word recovery either. I think most of the people I've been working with for many years said, I don't want to go back and recover what I was because I was miserable. That's why I wound up doing these kinds of things. But those of us who have been blessed and fortunate to have transformed our experience have a need to go back. Most of us have a need to go back into the system and help others. There was a psychologist that I remember back from my work in New York who invented the term the helper therapy principle. What that essentially meant was that when we help others, we help ourselves. And I think if most of us looked at that and examined how we are when we help others, we would recognize that. And that's the basis of the shield. And what we found is when a family member or somebody gets in touch with us who's institutionalized, hospitalized, whatever you call it, or on outpatient drugging, when we become involved in some way, that the psychiatrist who's doing that, who's not listened to the person who's requesting to get off this drug that is hurting them, when there's an outside group that's advocating, we usually don't have to send out a full-scale shield alert. Because when you take some of these practices out of the dark, where nobody knows about it, and brings it into the light, the psychiatrist or the administrator winds up most of the time saying, it's not worth it, let's not bother, they don't want electroshock, screw it, we'll just forget about it or whatever. Sometimes they get discharged. But sometimes there's an obstinate psychiatrist who is puffed up and says, you can't tell me what to do, I'm the authority. And at that point, we get a narrative going about what's going on, the abuse, how it's not right. And we send out a full-scale shield alert. So I want to get on to some other topics, but I want to say one other thing about the shield. The more people we can get involved in making phone calls, writing a letter, just the amount of people, we are more powerful. We're more able to do things. So right now, what we're involved in at MindFreedom is networking with independent living centers, people of other disabilities, and lawyers, interested lawyers who may just be doing some stuff as pro bono work, or the various protection and advocacy groups across the country. And what we're trying to do is develop relationships so that when somebody has a complaint in Ohio, we know some people in Ohio to call that are interested in this and will support the person. So we're trying to develop this all around the country with our affiliates, with local independent or state independent living centers, so that we really have a strong voice for people who don't have any other way to go. I want to tell you a little bit about some stuff I've been interested in recently. The idea, well, let me just read something to you that says it better than I do. This is on liberty, an essay by John Stuart Mill, who talks about the rights of people. The essay is actually on rights. And he stated in this, that the sole end for which mankind and womankind, he forgot that, is warranted individually or collectively to interfering with the liberty of action of any of their number is self-protection. That the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or moral, is not a sufficient warrant. In other words, we can't just lock somebody up or make them take drugs because we don't like the way they look and the way they act, and maybe they're talking to themselves on the street. And we think, the authority thinks, it's better for them to adhere to what we're telling them. Back to reading this. His own good, either physical or moral, is not a sufficient warrant. He cannot rightfully be compelled to do or forbear because it will be better for him to do so, because it will make him happier, because in the opinions of others, to do so would be wise or even right. These are good reasons for remonstrating with him or reasoning with him or persuading him or entreating him, but not compelling him or visiting him with any evil. Substitute the word drugs, in case he do otherwise. In the part which merely concerns himself, his independence is of right absolute. Over himself, over his own body and mind, the individual is sovereign. I've always liked an expression that Janet Frame, who is considered the most famous author from New Zealand, she had a saying that "for your own good" is the four most dangerous words in the language. Janet Frame was scheduled for a lobotomy when she was in a mental hospital, but she won an award for one of her writings and they decided not to do it. It's very capricious what happens to people. I think Jim earlier said something about 90% of people. I have a made up number, which I believe, which is 90% of the people who are experiencing some difficulty in their life, whether it's trauma, identity issues, or their life is just not going the way they want, and start acting differently than what is considered normal, that 90% is treated like the 5% who might need to be restrained because they might hurt somebody. So we have a whole system which works to do things to people, and sometimes it's excused by saying it's for people, but diminishes the rights and liberty of people. So what can we do about it? This is the task that we're looking at. This is why we're doing these meetings, to educate as much as possible. Unfortunately, what generally happens is that most of the people that attend these meetings know most of this because they've experienced it. So how do we get it out to the general public? I think each of you who are here can have a great impact by helping others see what you've learned. You know, Judy Chamberlain, who I had the privilege of knowing, and I would consider her a friend, really started started by getting groups of people together in the early 70s, 1970s, and they were support groups. It was one of the few times where people could come together and say whatever they want and actually have other people understand what they were through when they've been psychiatrized, when they've had these things happen to them. Out of that grew much of the advocacy efforts. people started to learn from each other and support each other and have relationships and be active and advocate. And right now we're in what I think is sort of a standstill, even though there are more people who know more. And we do have some critical psychiatrists and psychologists who are understanding more and want to change the system. And are actually looking at all the harm that is done within the system where we create what comes to be looked at as chronic mental patients. We are still saying the same things that I was told when I was in a hospital and diagnosed with schizophrenia. You're going to be in and out of the hospital for the rest of your life. You're going to have to take psychiatric drugs, and you should work at a very easy job without anxiety, not get yourself worked up, and you'll be able to survive. But you probably will be hospitalized many times. There's no cure for what you have. We have power in numbers and knowledge. There are a lot of things that we can do. We can attend hearings, you know, these hearings that, commitment hearings. We can start developing relationships with some of the survivor groups in the community. Most communities now, or most states, have groups of people who are supporting each other in different ways. We're trying to develop, and we have developed, affiliates of MindFreedom to work on the SHIELD, public education, support groups, whatever helps them in their communities. A couple of things I want to tell you about. I don't know if, I guess this looks backwards, but this book is called From Privileges to Rights. People labeled with psychiatric disabilities speak for themselves. What this was, in Albany, New York, the National Association for Rights Protection and Advocacy invited the National Council on Disability to do a public hearing. It was done in January 20th of 2000. And out of that came this book that was actually put together by Judy Chamberlain. And what it has in there is recommendations from the National Council on Disability. For those of you who are aware of other disabilities, Mark Abristo was the chair of the Council on Disability at that point. Ray Unziger convinced her. She was the first, and I don't even know if since then there has been another one. She was the first person with a psychiatric disability to be appointed to the council. The council was, for somebody to be put on this council, you had to be congressionally approved and approved by the President of the United States. It was a very, it was and is a prestigious appointment. On the chat, I put down the phone number of the National Council on Disability. I haven't been in touch with them in a long time, but I was wondering if people could get a copy, if they still had copies of this. It's 20 years later. I don't know if they stored them or if it's even online, but I think it would be important to get this book out again. When I used to teach in a graduate school, I used to use what was in this book for some of the curriculum. In it, there's 10 recommendations that came up from the testimony of the people over this 2-day period of time. Unfortunately, those recommendations are still as valid and viable today as they were then, 21 years ago. We have made progress, but it's still incredibly easy for somebody to be picked up by a wellness, I forget what they call it, a wellness check, where the cops come to your house because somebody complained that somebody was doing or dangerous. I mean, we're all aware of how difficult it is when the police are called. Once the police are called, there's going to be a problem.
Ron, can you hold the book up again? The people.
It looks to me like it's inside out, the lettering. Can you read it?
Yeah, now I can read it. For privilege to rights, people labeled with psychiatric disability speak for themselves.
Unfortunately, I'm starting to lose my voice. I'm just kind of struggling. At some point, what I might try to do, I've just rediscovered this. I was looking around for something, and I'm going to see if we can get this somehow. If we can't get copies from the National Council on Disability, I'm going to see if we can get this and post this on MindFreedom, if we can do something with that. It's a valuable book in terms of what's needed to be done and to create awareness. Judy used to say, if I went into the hospital with cancer and they wanted to give me chemotherapy and I refused it, they wouldn't force me to take it. But if I told them that I was once hospitalized or had taken psychiatric drugs or had a psychiatric history, they might force me to do the chemo. Again, for those dangerous words, for your own good. I think Jim mentioned the psychiatric advance directives. They're a good thing to have, but they don't hold up in court. If you get a sympathetic judge, they may be helpful. So they're worth doing. When I was involved in creating psychiatric advance directives in New York, we used to include a section in which you could write something for the staff at the hospital. If I'm hospitalized and I become anxious or agitated, these are the things that would help me. You know, let me go into an unlocked room and listen to music. Let me pace the halls, whatever worked for somebody. And that can be helpful. Another area would be, I've had a strong reaction physically. If I take this drug, I prefer not to take Haldol. I prefer not to take such and such drug because I took it before and I had a severe physical reaction. So it can be valuable, but it's not foolproof. What's most valuable, I believe, is to have people, to be networked with people who understand the issues and will help. And that's what we're trying to do with MindFreedom. I'm going to have to cut off because of my voice right now is going. I'm really glad that all of you have been here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. You know, I'm so, I don't even know what to say. I'm overwhelmed by this presentation. Thank you, everybody. It's just, I'm reading comments in the chat box. I'm listening to our presenters, and I just thank you all for being here. I think we can open up for comments. Susan, did you want to summarize a little bit about what's in the chat box?
Sure, the chat, an awful lot of it was mutual support. It was people telling their stories, other people empathizing with their stories, telling how they have things in common, things not in common. That was a huge thread for the first 2/3 of it. And then people started to go into specifics in terms of advocacy, that they'd done or had seen work. A lot of folks were putting in different resources. I encourage you guys all to actually download the chat, which you do by the 3 little dots in the far right-hand corner. Don't do it yet, because when you download it, all you'll get is what's been said so far. So you want to do it at the tail end. And I think it's actually, I know all the names more or less that are here. And I think it's been wonderful that what we have is a real mixture of people with labels, people who are allies, people who are parents. It's just not been sort of your typical preaching to the choir group. It really has been a really diverse group of people that have been here listening. And I hope that, you know, has an impact on everybody, that because it's only with mutual support that we accomplish anything. The Black Lives Matter movement has said several times that the people who really need to do the work are the white people. The Black people can't talk about Black Lives Matter because they already know, and they don't need to tell others that are Black what they need. It's the people who don't know. They're the ones that need to know. And it's the people who aren't Black that need to tell the stories about the people who are Black that are important to them and what their accomplishments are. Because sadly, they're given more validity. And so everybody here is important. But if you've heard something here that's touched you, pass it on. And if you want to say something now is your time to.
So one
Susan,
last,
I do.
I just want to add one thing is, what strikes me always, it's always about relationships and reaching out, even if you think it's your adversary, or and there's also a strong, important role for people playing witness. And I think Sarah addressed that a little bit as well. So anyway, yeah, let's hear what y'all have to say.
So I have, I guess, questions and comments. So my name is Erica Kadeup. I had introduced myself as working for a Center for Independent Living. I have been a social worker for the past 7 years. So I'm young in the field, and I know that. When I started in the social work field, my background has been primarily in the mental health work. And one of the things that I did, a part of my job was to go to hospitals, to ER rooms, and I was the mental health worker who tried to de-escalate the situation before an involuntary commitment occurred. I can't even tell you the amount of commitment hearings that I've been a part of, probably 50 or more in the 3 or 4 years that I was at one facility that I worked at. And I've also been to state hospitals to advocate for releases and things like that. I had put in the chat the different requirements that Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia had, of the holds being 72 hours, not the whole 180. And then it was a 30-day, and then you had to go back to another hearing to be held more than 30 days and so forth. So I put that information in. And what I got out of this tonight was something completely different than what I've gotten out of the work that I've done as a social worker, because I had many people who thanked me after they had been involuntarily committed for being that advocate and being with them through the process, because the commitment had changed their life. And so it was unique tonight to hear the other side of it, the people who I didn't hear from after the commitment, the people who were hurt, traumatized, and went through such a horrible experience, because I didn't get that end of it. It was very rare that someone came back to me and didn't say, I'm so glad I went, it changed my life. I was at the worst part of my life. I would have killed myself. I would have killed my spouse, because I've dealt with both what were considered suicidal patients, homicidal patients. And just like it was mentioned before, the term psychosis. And so I guess tonight was very eye-opening for me, because for the first time I heard the other side. And so I want to thank you all for sharing your stories. I am a mental health
professional, but I also have a mental health diagnosis myself. But I've never, as you guys said, been on the side of the point of the needle. I've always been able to get outpatient therapy or outpatient treatment, and that was good enough for me. And so thank you all for being so blunt, so honest, and sharing that side. And I can't remember a name. I'm sorry, I'm really bad with names. That you talked about the trauma that your body keeps it. There's actually a book that I really enjoyed reading. It was called The Body Keeps the Score. And it talks about anybody who's been in a traumatic experience of any sort, whether it is a death, a rape, any type of trigger, anything, domestic violence. When our body gets into that physical feeling again, we have that trauma, we re-experience that trauma. And it's so common, and people don't realize how much trauma has effect on us and how it will continue to have an effect on us the rest of our lives. And so I just, again, I thank you all, and thank you for bringing my eyes to the other side of the story that I've never heard before.
Erica, I want to say thank you so much for your honesty and disclosure. And I wonder if any of our presenters would like to respond to that.
I'd like to respond. Thank you for sharing that. I'll try and make it through with my voice. When I was working in New York, I was asked to speak to the judges that adjudicate cases of abuse in the 18 psychiatric hospitals in New York. And I was thinking about that. I wasn't sure what exactly I would have to say to them. So I called my mentor, Ray Unziger, who was a contemporary of Judy's, and both of them really mentored me in many ways. And Ray said, tell the judges that the only ones that know what goes on in a mental hospital and it's wrong are the patients, because the people who work in the mental hospitals are always back to the culture of the mental hospital, and it all seems okay. It seems okay to inject people, to hold them down, and all those different kinds of things. Second part that I would tell you about is I did a project in New York, which was called the Recovery Project, in which we got people who were ex-patients in the hospital that were living in the community that had done well. And we had them go back into the 18 hospitals, different ones, some were from the same hospitals, and they would talk about their experience in the hospital, what was helpful and what was harmful. Everybody that worked in each of the hospitals had to take part in this 3-hour module. Whether they were a nurse, an office worker, a janitor, a doctor, they're all mandatory to attend. At the end of the presentations, many of the people who worked in the hospitals were crying. They said they never knew how they affected the people who were inpatients. So I want to thank you for bringing this up, because it's really important for people to hear not just the successful stories, which I believe, and I think many of the people in this room believes, that there is not a lot of successful experiences with current treatments, except the people who have survived and had successful experiences are the ones that can speak about it often.
Can I add to that, Ron, a little bit, and moderator Susan? I'd like to add that what I've observed with my daughter, and then from my own feelings about giving feedback to social workers who work under the medical model in involuntary settings, I have personally felt very afraid to complain about the treatment, to expose what I felt was very unprofessional conduct in an involuntary setting. I was afraid of reprisal in my I was afraid of having my visits. I have, been, I'm friends with mothers, a lot of whom were blacklisted from hospitals because, like, one of my friends, Marcia Myers, well, she's really radical. She left a psychiatrist meeting once by saluting Heil Hitler to her daughter's psychiatrist. She was never allowed to visit her daughter for a whole year. Her daughter resisted her forced injection. Every time they came for her daughter with a needle, she would run and they would bolt her down and they would give her a depot injection. But my friend Marcia never got to see her daughter and give her support because she was unguarded and she was emotional in her encounter with psychiatrists. I have had other mothers who were blacklisted from hospitals for resisting or for being critical. And if that can happen to a parent with privilege, me, look at, I'm white skinned, married, straight, heterosexual, property owned. That can happen to me. I can only imagine what is happening to immigrants, indigenous people, people of color, people on with different sexual orientations, whatever. And then add to that the fear that is inculcated in people, fear of speaking out for reprisal, fear that your discharge date will never come, the fear that they can hold you longer, they can up your medication. There are a lot of ways that authority figures in an involuntary setting can make your life very difficult. They can move your privilege. So I'm just saying that's my experience.
So I want to add one last thing to what Sarah just said, and then Sarah, I was aware of an individual in the state hospital whose family were strong advocates, and they took treatment guardianship away from the family and gave it to the hospital, the institution. I'm with Ron, it's not a hospital. And that to me is outrageous, but somehow it happened. So I understand the fear. And that's why I appreciate what Erica said, because that's honest disclosure.
I will say that I agree, and that I have worked with social workers who have that guard up, who don't, they're done. Like, this is how we're going to do it. This is how it works. You just get over it. And I have never believed that. I've always hated that. It always needs to be what's best for the person, not what's best for the hospital or what's easier for the staff. And that is why I changed career paths, and I now work for a Center for Independent Living, and I am all about the independent living movement, disability rights. And so I appreciate everyone's feedback. Thank you very much. I just wanted you to know that I agree with you completely, and that's why I've changed the course of where I am in my career.
Thank you, Erica.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. My name is Lisa Guardiola, and I don't want to offend anyone, but I'm going to refer to my own personal story. So I am formally diagnosed with schizophrenia. I understand that some of you are not NAMI, don't seem to like NAMI. But I also am the vice president of my local affiliate for NAMI. I'm a sitting board member for NAMI Illinois. And I've been on what I would call my recovery process since 2004. I have been involuntarily committed. When in 2004, my mother was very distraught and very scared that I was going to take my own life. And she didn't really know what to do, and she had just come in contact with NAMI, and so she petitioned to the mental health court to have me committed. And for me, I'm very fortunate that I only stayed 17 days in the hospital. I also am very fortunate that I was never, I'm sorry, it seems like somebody's screaming in the background, but I was never restrained in my stay. So I'm very fortunate Now the doctor, the psychiatrist wanted to keep me for 3 months. But my parents, and I never really found out why, but for some reason, my mother and I was in a state hospital. My mother and father decided to not sign the paperwork to have me stay for 30 days. That's why I only stayed for 17. And I've been on my road to recovery ever since. I have encountered in the mental health field, for me, I've encountered very loving, very supportive individuals along the way. I'm very fortunate that I had a good support system in my family. I'm very fortunate that my first psychiatrist talked about recovery, and she was my champion, and she helped me to realize that just because I have this disorder, that it doesn't define me, and that I can do anything that I put my mind to. And you know, that was when I was, I would say, about 30. And I am going to be turning 50 this May. You know, my recovery process has been long, and it's had its hills and valleys. I have had other hospitalizations, but I admitted myself into the hospital, and I know I'm very self-aware of my triggers, and like what I know when I'm struggling, and I know when to ask for help. And so I'm very fortunate that I didn't have these horrific and traumatizing stories that your family members have. And I just want you to know that, you know, for me, I just want you to know that I hear you, and I'm an advocate for you. And I teach classes now. I teach mental health first aid. I teach suicide, QPR, suicide prevention. I advocate, and I work for a mental health provider. And I'm going for what is called my CRS credential, like recovery support specialist credential. And there's a movement in Illinois where the state of Illinois is hiring people with lived experience to work with other individuals that are struggling, and to help them to not have to be in the hospital. We have what are called living rooms. I don't know if you've ever heard of a living room model, but a living room model it literally is like a space that is set up that's very comfortable. And instead of having to take the person to an ER, you would take them to the living room, and they get to talk to a peer support specialist, to just kind of, have somebody that understands what they're going through, to help them in their, understand, that somebody is here for them, and they have an advocate, and somebody that, is going through similar struggles that they can talk to. So I don't know if anybody else has ever heard of the living room model, or, I'm just wondering, what do you feel?
Lisa, can I?
How do you feel about that? Yes.
Well, I always worry about the peer movement. I know that a lot of them are doing as best they can, but if they work in concert with psychiatry to be a coercive force, to say, take your meds, listen to your doctor, keep going to your appointments, do what they say, that's not always helpful. Do you know what I'm saying? That's being complicit in the harm that people are having. Like when people say, I don't want to take my meds, do we ask them why? Or do we just tell them, no, you need to take your meds, you need to comply? That's an act of violence, to make somebody do something that they feel they don't want to do. You know what I mean?
So, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that to me, there are a couple of problems, but I want to preface this. I knew Gunnar Dybwad, who was a advocate of deinstitutionalization way back in the 50s and 60s. And he used to say that he thought at every professionals meeting, there ought to be a time of confession and contrition, that everybody should go around the room and talk about the atrocities that they had been involved with, because everyone, he was a sociologist, but an attorney, but he knew a lot of people who worked in the institutions, and he thought everybody had stories like that. One problem I see is that just like with physical disability, our built environment excludes people because, you know, we don't have ramps, we don't have accessible transportation, whatever. I feel like the environment we've built, I mean, just the phraseology, an emergency room. You go to the emergency room when you have an emergency, but a lot of emergencies aren't, you know, we don't, I mean, you're talking about the living room model. I mean, that sounds like a good idea if it isn't coercive. But by and large, you know, first responders are police and fire departments. We don't have an infrastructure for meeting the needs of people who are in crisis of one sort or another. And then the second thing I want to say is that the propaganda about people with psychiatric, I'm a psychiatric survivor, people with, you know, who are labeled, is just amazing. I saw a program just the other day. It's one of those the crime shows, SVU or whatever that's called, and they depicted this person with autism who was like stabbing people to death, and it was clearly, I mean, it was so demonizing of people who, you know, are labeled autistic or on the spectrum. I mean, it's just shocking the amount of propaganda. And then the third thing I want to say is that I teach a course on disability rights history, and just had an experience this past week where I was asking people to read accounts of people who've been institutionalized, and the students were just absolutely shocked that these sorts of things happen. I mean, the division between the reality that we know is there and the reality as perceived by people who have not been involved in the system is just so, there's such a divide. It's like, you know, it's like the lie about the election or whatever. I mean, it's different realities almost. So I'm not sure how to what else to say other than that's, you know, it's just very difficult at this point. And I appreciate that there's been progress made. I think there has, but we still have such a long way to go. And
Thank you, Fred. Fred, I'd just like to respond to what you're saying. And I think one of the things where we can have more input, and the gatekeepers for people entering the psychiatric system is families generally. And families don't know what to do with somebody who is acting differently than they think they should. The only thing that is available is to call, you know, some kind of crisis person to come, which usually escalates it. I think for us, for me, and I've been looking at this for a number of years, and it was my specialty when I was in graduate school, because I thought even 40 years ago, it was so important. We need to help families understand that what the person is experiencing is something that can be handled most of the time within the family, that most people are going to come out of this state with support and being kept safe in a matter of 4 or 5 weeks. For those of you who know Lauren Mosier, I remember asking him this. We were down in Tennessee, and I said, when somebody comes to Soteria and they're in one of these disorganized states where reality is kind of blending with other things, how long without drugs without being hospitalized when they went to Soteria, would it take them generally to come back to thinking in a way that was more clear and less disorganized? He said 4 to 6 weeks. So if we could find a way to get families to understand their power in this, yeah, some people, the term that I think of is contained. Some people, are just so out of control that they may need containment. And I think that's the people who Erica had mentioned before, said being involuntarily committed saved my life or whatever. There's a bunch of them that are lives were not saved. But I think we need to put emphasis into helping families understand. Just my thoughts on what you're saying.
My name is Jay.
Yeah, I would, oh, I'm sorry.
I think I'm next. I'm just looking at the hands on the chat here, so I'm going to jump in. My name's Jay Everett. I'm the dad of a adult child that had an altered state about a year ago. And some of the things I'd like to comment on tonight is, and thank you to all the speakers and everyone that's speaking, is this thing about Ron had talked about that non-compliance had made him kind of survive the experience. And I guess what kind of frustrates me or makes me angry is that when we went into this situation, I picked up my son. He had an altered state, went to Mexico. I had to go get him, bring him back. So we're both in shock coming back. And when we get off the plane and we go to our local hospital, the first thing they do is sell compliance. So I've been in sales all my life and I just felt like I was being sold, but I can totally relate to what Sarah was saying earlier, is that I thought this was the best thing to do for my kid. He'd ran for me on the beach in Mexico. So he was in a state of mind that he might've hurt himself. So like what Ron was saying is that I would have really appreciated showing up at that hospital and having choices, or a living room like somebody talked about earlier. But this whole process, I had to work extremely hard to find you guys. I had to work extremely hard to find another point of view. So now I'm in the process helping my kid to see another point of view. And I'm just his parents because he's been sold by a psychiatrist that believes in drugs. So now we're on this journey of educating ourselves as a family, coming together and understanding that we can heal together, and that, maybe drugs isn't an option. But once you've gone down that rabbit hole, then you learn, well, geez, you can't just come off these psych drugs. You have to have this tethering. So now it's a whole, I almost need an advocate and a psychiatrist to talk to my psychiatrist. And I'm walking on pins and needles about what I say because I'm afraid of what they're going to do to my kid. So, I knew in my heart that what they were saying, and I really could relate to, I think Ron said it, that the whole medical system seems to be set up to treat 5%, but 95% get treated the same way. And I just felt, after reading all this and discovering all this, I felt ashamed. I felt alone. I felt I was the only one advocating for my son. And now I'm trying to learn how to speak their language, which is extremely frustrating because I'm thinking, okay, if I react this way, they're going to read the DSM and put me in. And I'm like, man, this is insane. I can't even talk to these guys. So it's been a real delicate cakewalk or walking this fine line of trying to advocate, but also be positive and be in the solution and try to look for something to an alternative. So that's my 2 cents. I really appreciate you guys all being here. And I will shut up.
Thank you. Teresa, you've had your hand up for a while.
Hi, can you hear me?
Want to unmute yourself? Yeah.
I just unmuted myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go for it.
Well, I really appreciate this meeting, and I'm a little nervous. I hope I'm speaking in a safe space. I have the feeling I am intuitively. I'm a psychiatric survivor, having voluntarily signed into a mental institution back in the 1970s when I was nearly murdered by my husband, and I was screaming, so neighbors were worried.
Up, you've gone quiet.
Grace, you're a little frozen right now.
Oh.
I want to hear the story.
You muted yourself by accident.
Uh-oh. I see. Can you hear me now?
Yep, now we can hear you.
Okay. I'm a psychiatric survivor, having voluntarily signed into a mental institution to get away from my violent ex-husband when I was nearly being murdered. And so he drove me to a mental hospital to sign in to discount me from all of our friends and neighbors. And that was a long time ago. But ever since then, I've been dealing with trauma. My dad was a career military man in Vietnam and would come home traumatized. So he transmitted that trauma to his family. And then I married someone who was violent, not knowing any better. And then I was stalked for 8 years with 2 little children and having to count on the
You somehow muted yourself again.
I think she just
connection may be
froze.
unstable.
Her connection froze.
Yeah.
Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we heard the first part. Keep going. You're doing great. You keep freezing. Sorry, you keep freezing, but you're doing great. Keep going.
Yeah, I live in an area where internet connection is kind of shaky. So anyway, that
If you
kind of
turn off your video.
Turn off my
If you
video.
turn off your video, you might have a better. Yeah.
Can you hear me
might have
now?
a better connection.
Better now?
So far,
Yes.
so good.
Okay. So having had that label, well, not only having the label, I've had a lot of emotional pain from trauma, both from my childhood and being married to someone who nearly murdered me and then stalked me for 8 years with my children. And I've survived homelessness 5 times. And I consider myself to be a strong survivor, and that it was a positive, there were positive things about it that I am very proud that I survived and that I learned a lot about our
Frozen again, but I think we hold on. She'll be back. It seems like she's just in and out a little bit.
had a lot of high anxiety, and so I thought I would get more healing for PTSD. And I don't know, now I have moved close to my daughter, son-in-law, and grandkids in Alaska, and I made the mistake of being open about being on disability with PTSD. And as a result, without any direct discussion with me, my grandkids are kind of being turned against me, it feels like, with the other grandmother doing the major part of the grandparenting, and the other set of grandparents having way more visitation time with my grandkids. And it's been very hard to deal with because none of that was directly discussed with me. I was just treated like someone you don't even talk to. And the other grandparents have made comments about how she should be taking her medications. But I can thoroughly understand how she ended up depressed, but I never talk with her about that directly because she's coming out of treating me disrespectfully because I didn't buy into it with her. But I'm trying to figure out if I need to take some kind of legal action to have visitation with my grandkids. The other grandparents, the grandfather is an attorney in Eugene, and the grandmother is the retired head of some school administration department within Eugene, and very high status, upper middle class. And my dad was a career military officer, so I had some quote unquote class that I was part of, but I wanted to be more like my grand. Joined this visit today. And then I went to Providence Behavioral Health recently for neurofeedback training. And then during a telemedicine visit, the neurofeedback facilitator was very vicious with me. He asked how I was for this telemedicine visit because we couldn't meet in person at that point to put the electrodes on my head for the brainwave training or whatever. And he said, "How are you?" I said, "I'm depressed because of the pandemic and because of politics, and I'm feeling isolated, and I have all these gifts and talents, but now I'm on disability. It's very hard to use those, and I'm trying to figure out how to use those and make more money because I don't have enough money to live on." So he just was really aggressive and said, "Get over it. Your parents are dead. You're just stuck. Move on with your life," like that. And so I filed a complaint, and now I'm not going there anymore. And I feel like my civil rights were.
So Teresa, you keep freezing, but I want to field this to Jim. I'm heartfelt for your story. Jim, do you have any kind of
unethical people? So can you hear me?
You're going in and out.
Oh boy.
You're back. And when I'm heartfelt for your story, and when you're finish your story for sure, and then I'm going to field this to Jim because I'm not sure if he does or have an answer for you or not.
Okay. Yeah, one thing I'm trying to decide is whether or not to file a written complaint with Providence Behavioral Health. Because I'm feeling maybe I'll be labeled someone who can't take care of myself, because that's what that therapist was saying during that get over it thing. I was saying, I feel so overwhelmed because of the pandemic. And then on top of that, I have not enough money to live on. And this therapist said, "Oh, just write a few top priorities at the top of the page and get those done for the day." And I said, "Well, I have 3 pages full of about 40 items to do that are all high priority." Had the idea that they were relating to me as a diagnosis instead of a unique human being. So they would just jump in and give me all this advice that was not at all relevant to what I needed or wanted. But so the supervisor then called me to say that it sounded kind of intimidating. It was like, "Well, you've been through 3 of our therapists already, but we have 28 providers," she called them. And we all believe that we know better than the client what to do for them. And I said, "Well, I'll think about whether or not I want to come back." And then I this left message that I'm not coming back, but I did call the regional compliance office for Providence, and they are investigating that mental health clinic now. But I'm really feeling kind of odd about it because health. I had said I had been to therapists where the people who were helpful to me were the ones who said that I had my own wisdom and my own sound judgment. And that's what I had learned as a survivor of domestic violence that was healing to me, which has helped me and my children survive many, many high-risk situations while being stalked and forced to live in poverty and gang territory as a result and things like that. So I'm debating whether or not to write the letter, which might help me feel more empowered and like my own perceptions are valid. But then I also feel very intimidated by the institution that is apparently accepted by Providence as a sound model of mental health treatment. And then on the other hand, I'm just trying to move on. I'm on disability, and I really feel like it's not in my.
So Teresa, we keep losing you, but I suspect that all of our presenters, you're hitting so many different, I hope you can hear me, you're hitting so many different levels here. I suspect all of our
And I want
presenters.
to use those gifts and talents.
So Teresa, this is Susan.
Hi.
Musante. So you have just hit like every level, the crux of everything we're talking about.
Yeah.
And all the levels, like, oh my gosh. So I suspect all of our presenters may or may not have a reaction or a response. And I know that the participants do, but let's start with our presenters and see, let's start with Jim, and then if the other ones do, and then everybody chime in. This is hit everything that we're talking about today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So Susan, do you have anything in particular that you want me to think I should address, or did you cover a lot of?
She started with legal issues, but then, you know, Teresa, you started with legal issues. I don't want to talk about you like you're not here because you are here. But you started with some kind of legal issues and what are your rights. And then I heard so much about what's the right thing to do when, you know, you're dealing with hospital personnel, because then it goes even bigger than that. And I don't know, maybe Ron and Sarah can jump in too, but let's start with Jim, if there's any legal things here. Because the first question I heard, it wasn't really a question, but the first question I heard was kind of a legal question, but maybe not. And then the other stuff, just many layers here. So I don't know if that helps, Jim, but I think she was saying, what are her rights in this situation? You know, her grandparent rights, her, those sort of rights, if I was hearing it correctly.
That was one of the reasons. I'm just listening now.
So this is Jim. I've gotten really pretty pessimistic about being able to, you know, enforce your rights, and so I think there's a couple of levels. One is you can. One thing is just to try and be practical, and you know, just try and avoid the whole situation as much as possible. I mean, in terms of we had a situation in Providence. I don't know if you've heard, with this young man named Brett Bond, who really had he had sinus problems, and he was given prednisone, and then that caused him to, you know, become manic and psychotic, and they brought him in, and they damn near killed him. And he had a his parents had power of attorney and they went to court to take it away and stuff. And so, you know, we have a situation. I try not to be, you know, overly dramatic and stuff, but I think there's a certain amount of truth to this idea of medical tyranny. And so I
Yeah, I do
think there's
too.
yeah. So I think the fears about retaliation or other negative consequences are, you know, are fairly realistic. I mean, it's definitely a possibility. So I look at these things as, and sometimes in just practical ways, is, you know, if, and one of the ways is just to not make waves, I think is a perfectly legitimate response. I also think it's perfectly legitimate to really, you know, raise holy hell and try and, you know, go after them. But one of the problems is when someone, you know, does not have particular social power, and that sounds like you, then it's really pretty easy to just be crushed. And I don't know. I mean, this is not a you know, really uplifting, positive message, but maybe it's a practical one. I don't know if that's helpful at all.
It is helpful. I'm feeling, being on disability, that I'm very disempowered feeling, and isolated from people who would help me move on to just be instead of being a label, being a gifted, talented artist, writer, businesswoman of some kind, who likes to help people heal. I probably want to go back to school, actually. I'm just trying to overcome my own negative stereotypes about being older and labeled this or that. And I'm just beginning to say, well, if I'm going to do it, I just have to do it and forget all of the fears about what people think or what I'm going to be labeled or anything. But then on the other hand, I want to be proud.
Teresa, thanks for sharing. I too am a grandma, so I really want to honor you for your strong desire to spend positive time with your grandchildren. And in doing so, I hope that you can make every moment you spend with them count, so you can, you know, help them become the person they should become, and help them develop the skills they need to protect themselves from oppression and tyranny and violence. And I really want to honor you for wanting to heal and wanting to spend time with your grandchildren.
Well, thanks. I feel like my grandkids have taken a nonverbal message from the other grandparents and my son-in-law, and even my daughter, that I'm the less important grandmother, the less valid grandmother, the less trustworthy grandmother. But I do call and say hello and how are you? But I feel sad that I would like to share all this arts and crafts and coping with adversity. I feel like I have a lot to offer as a very resilient, creative problem solver person.
No doubt.
Y me había olvidado que eran las 6.
So I'm just going to jump in here at 2 counts. The first is, I worked in a state hospital in the 70s, and I cannot tell you how many women came in whose husbands brought them in, whose husbands I know were violent. And this is when I realized I could not be part of that system in that way. And so I honor that. I honor that you went through that, and it's so freaking real. I can't even tell you. The other thing I want to say is that when I have been sort of estranged,
Chao, mi amor.
a few times when I've been estranged or outcast with my family members, I always kept in touch with the kids, and the kids appreciate it. They are not their parents, and I just want to. I encourage you. And I don't know, Ron, do you have any words of wisdom? Because I'm done, and then I'm sure our participants can react to this, because it's like exactly what we've been talking about.
I think we might have some people who want to make some comments, and it might be relevant to what Teresa's been talking about because the hands went up after she started.
Go ahead.
So Susan Fendel?
One of the things that I wanted to comment on, and that's related to this, is that some of the ways to fix these issues have to do with getting through to the legislators and state administrative bodies and working on getting laws and policies that recognize people with psych histories as being human beings. And one of the bills in Massachusetts that is being considered would say that you can't take a kid away from a family or from you know, a mother or father just because the person has a disability. There's got to be a direct connection between the disability and their ability to care for the parent. But there are I deal with so many state commissions and state agencies that don't include people with lived experience in the policymaking process. And it's really, really helpful to attend public hearings, not commitment hearings, but public hearings on different policy issues like Medicaid, or, you know, it could be anything. It could be integrated care, which, by the way, is not great for people with psych diagnoses in their medical records, because there's oodles of peer-reviewed studies that show that people with psych diagnoses in their medical records get inferior physical health care. But in any case, it's important to go to these hearings and tell personal stories, because these policymakers have no idea about what the issues are. And it's also important, though, that the testimony be focused on whatever specific issues that the commissions or the legislators are working on right then. But it is so powerful. It is so much more powerful than when I present statistics. People, they literally do not understand that people with a psychiatric label are human beings just like them. And hearing about the travesties and trauma that other, you know, that people have gone through really makes an impression. There was only one other thing I wanted to mention, which was with COVID, there is a real push to say that there aren't enough mental health services. And in particular, there aren't enough hospital beds. And we've got to be out there saying, hey, there are alternatives. There are things besides hospital beds that will help people. And I'm sorry that, Lisa, that it is contrary to your experience, but NAMI very often is so supportive of increasing the number of hospital beds and don't really bring up alternatives. And in fact, on these commissions, very often the only people on these commissions, other than maybe some mental health provider groups, is NAMI. But NAMI doesn't really represent the voice of people with lived experience. It does represent family members very well. I mean, in your case may be very different, but we really need to say to legislators and policymakers, nothing about us without us. So I really encourage everybody to work with maybe their local organizations that follow mental health hearings. The PNA may do that. I don't know in your state, but then get people to the hearings. Talk, show them that, you know, these policies that they're coming up with without talking to anybody who actually is going to be subject to the policies are not so
No
great.
kidding.
Okay, who was who did I just promise next? Will Brady. You ready?
We can't hear you, Will. We could hear you before.
Yeah. Will, can you unmute yourself?
I don't think he's muted.
If his video is on, he could turn it off maybe.
We can't hear you.
Well, we can't hear you, so maybe we can go to the next and then go back to Will.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So let's see, Marilyn?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, Marilyn, we can hear you.
Okay, I would like to make a number of comments. One is that for a short time, I worked on a hospital unit at a psychiatric for a state hospital. And an individual had been abused by her husband, and she didn't want to leave because this was the only safe place she knew.
Yeah.
So sometimes people flee to a hospital to get away from abuse. That's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing I wanted to say is that if you have some sort of insurance like Medicaid or whatever, you may be able to choose your own provider. There are a number of providers that will accept the kind of insurance you have, in which case you can then get an advocate for yourself and not go through all that system. I don't know where you are or if you have that ability, but if you've got insurance, Medicaid or whatever, there are going to be providers that you can go to, and not necessarily the one that you were dissatisfied with.
Thank you. No, I don't know how you say your name, so I'm going to not say it right. Pettery? Petery? P-T-E-R-Y.
Terry. It's Terry.
Oh, with a silent T. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. It's short for pterodactyl. I just wanted to say, in my perspective, I'm a psychiatric survivor and also came into this world with disabilities, hard of hearing, and coming in as a queer person, a trans person, and not getting the support I needed as an adolescent. And then really going through this struggle in my life, getting locked up and then finding my way out of it, and all my friends disappeared. And it came up to Alaska, and that's when I started doing some of the advocacy work. And it was really strange to be part of a nonprofit. And then after that, I went into my own independent healing field of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And going to school, I ran into other problems, like this whole idea of like what it takes to get into graduate school. I didn't have it. But, you go through these things and you find out like you didn't go in with all the support you needed. And so I ended up homeless the next few years. And, in that process, I found my biggest advocacy group, working with houseless folks, and found community that I didn't have before. And I feel like there's some stuff that is really interesting for me when I come back and I look at everything now, is that we're dealing with a system that's traumatized itself, and a people that we are living in the system is traumatized.
Yeah.
And we're all triggered. And the people who have power are some of these people who are living in a normalized trauma system. And so we bring our feelings to them. They just get freaked out.
Yeah.
And shut it down, right? That's the way it works. We shut that stuff down. We don't know how to deal with grief. We don't know how to deal with the collective trauma we have. And then we have war. And we're like really mad at people who are going warlike, but not looking like we have this whole system of traumatized historically that came over and like murdered Indians because we didn't have a sense of belonging anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this whole big system of problems. So like when I'm dealing with things, I end up taking care of the people who I want to go get help from. And now it's like the thing by realizing that if I can't ask for help for these people, then I'm supposed to help. And it switched my brain around all over the place. And so one of the things that got me out of getting locked up was just disagree with them. Okay, yeah, you're right. I got the hell out of there with supports. I made sure I had no insurance, that didn't have a reason to keep me anymore. They really wanted my money. And so I got out. And the thing that has made the most sense to me is making friends, finding community in any way I can. And my best community was nature. I mean, getting the hell away from really a lot of sick people, because the earth is healthy in a lot of ways. You go out and you find a way to go camping. This is me. But that has been my biggest support, is looking at nature and like going, oh, people, have we gotten a lot lost? And it's a whole big issue that we have a really sick culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that has reframed everything for me. And so it's like going back to those spiritual thing about really checking into it and finding a way to help myself stay calm. And so like this mindfulness meditation has been the biggest, strongest streak through everything I've done. Just find that quiet place and just breathing, because breathing interrupts all of our disturbances and finds us to relax and calm. And it's like that is like a simple thing. People can go find somebody who does meditation, or go to Icarus Project and find help with people. Moms, and go get help with families. I really love moms. I think Cindy Fisher's on here, but she hasn't said anything to me. But you'll have hope. Find a way to inside to have hope, and don't give up. I mean, those are the biggest things that I like to share.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. I'm trying to make Qigong, which is a traditional Chinese medicine healing, self-healing system, a big habit with me. And that's what I'd like to study, is to become a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, acupuncturist also. Because I feel like there's a lot of healing wisdom there.
May I speak? I'd like to address that, what you just said.
Can you be quick? We got a whole lot of people waiting.
I know. Yeah, well, Chinese medicine based in diet, I couldn't even perceive sensory input fully growing up, as some people here have heard me say. And Chinese medicine is extremely powerful and based in biology.
Yeah, yeah.
And I have to say, it is dependent on the practitioner, because you are dealing with human beings. Practice medicine. How mature is that person? How wise have they picked up any wisdom in their process? Because beginning doctors are not the same thing as older doctors who have picked up some kind of bedside manner. And what we don't have is the wisdom traditions that are in our psychiatry or in our hospital system. It's like individual by individual. And that's a really important thing to think about.
It is. I used to go to a healing project, and then I realized I wasn't being believed, although the therapy was really good. The acupuncture itself was really relaxing and healing.
Yeah, and it all depends. Like anything that can work, that works for you, take it up. And, and keep,
support on that.
Keep going.
So Susan, do we have, I'm not sure if Will Brady's back or not. Do we have other people with their hands up that I'm not?
Only a couple left, but let's see if we can hear Will now. Will, send me a text message if you hear me. Because we're not hearing you. Check the volume on your keyboard. Maybe you turned your volume off on your keyboard. I've done that on occasion.
He said he was leaving and then I thought he said he was back. So, but maybe he's
back. Yeah, he sent me a text that he was back, but.
Oh, okay. Will, are you with us?
Well, we'll try him again. Lacey.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to talk someone that I forgot her name, but she was talking about how some people who were coming from abusive situations kind of chose to stay at the hospital.
Oh, yeah.
For that. I have experience with that. I grew up in a very abusive household, and so I had I'm a lifelong psychiatric survivor. That my first hospitalization, I was 10 years old, and it pretty much went that way until till I was about 20. It was pretty steady and constant. I was in a state hospital from the time I was 18 for 18 months in the state of Alabama, which not a great state to be committed in. Not that any state is great to be committed in. I experienced a lot of abuse there, and I would have to say I was denied an education. You know, being raised by these hospitals. I didn't have, you know, I wasn't taught like basic reading and math, and you know, I learned that later in life. But I was denied an education. You know, in my stay in the state hospital, I was literally lost in the system. They couldn't find my file. After much tribulation, I ended up getting out. I was raped by workers there. There's a lot of things has happened, and none of it was helpful to me. You know, I know that there are some people who claim or who say that it was helpful for them, but I will say that there are a few angels that was in the hospital that did help me, that worked there. You know, that would give me books and shoes, you know, secretly, because they weren't allowed to do that. So those little gestures of kindness meant a lot to me and really helped me keep going. I guess my most recent hospitalization was 2017 in Johnstown, Colorado. I'm 39 now, and I stayed out of the hospital. I guess from the time I got out of the state hospital around 20 until 2017, and whenever I was put in it was Clearview Hospital. I can't tell you how long I was there. I can't. I know that every time I would I was wrapped in sheets, and every time I would wake up, they would give me more shots. I wasn't combative or anything. I know that I was wrapped up long enough to whenever I woke up that my urine would be cold. You know, and this was just 2017. And whenever, I can't tell you how long I was there. It wasn't like the extent of the state hospital, but I never seen a doctor. I never talked to a doctor the entire time I was there. I was pretty much just in a room and given constant shots. Whenever I got out, they sent me away in a taxi, and at that point I went from there to being homeless. I lost my home. I lost everything. But later on in life, I blocked that experience out of my head until just last year, whenever I was going through peer support, mental health peer support training, and it just kind of started rushing back to me. You know, I'm diagnosed CPTSD, and it just all came flooding back to me. And so I looked online, and they actually closed the hospital last year that I was in, Clearview. There's a video on YouTube called Dying in Clearview. And what upsets me the most about my experience there is that I should have said something, because there was several people who died in the exact, and I could have very well died. There's many people who died from 2017 up until 2020 in that hospital. And I live with this guilt of not doing anything about it. I don't know, I guess that especially once you've been in the system for so long, I don't really feel like I have a voice, or if anyone would listen to me about it. I've been on SSI pretty much my entire life and was told that's all I can do. But I found MindFreedom since I've lived here in Eugene for about, since I came here at the end of 2017. I've a lot of the resources has helped me quite a bit. The choices videos were awesome, and I commend everyone who had the bravery to speak out against these horrible forces. I do feel like that mental illness and stigma is something that it hasn't really gotten better, as we would like. I wish I could say it's gotten better, from Dorothea Dix days, but really, some places haven't, it's heartbreaking, and like I was saying in the chat, with the term is diagnostic overshadowing. Whenever someone with mental illness or learning disabilities or mental disabilities, they have a medical problem, and they're just denied. They're saying, well, you have mental illness, it's in your head, nothing's wrong with you. Or like recently here in Oregon, I think it was Hillsborough, but there's two different separate cases in Oregon with the COVID-19 going on, that these people with mental disabilities were straight up denied ventilators, because even though these people were, in group homes and relatively happy, the doctor deemed that they didn't have a quality of life, and they didn't deserving of a ventilator to save their life. Luckily, advocates stepped in, and I'm not sure about the man, but the female, she was put on a ventilator, and now she's fully recovered. But that's something that I think that really needs to be brought to light, is diagnostic overshadowing, and the stigma and bias in the mental health and the medical field for people with mental illness. Also recently, there was a man in Canada who was diagnosed bipolar, went into the ER, as I'm not sure, somewhere in Canada, and he was denied, basically ruled it out. Oh, it's in your head, it's your bipolar. And he was in excruciating pain, and later on he was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, and the doctor wouldn't even see him, and that's something that I've dealt with personally as well, especially, I don't know if it's mostly here in Oregon, because my medical health has kind of gone really downhill since I've been here. So I can't really say if it's just here in Oregon or that's what I've experienced, because I've been medically healthy otherwise, in other states. But, here in Oregon, I've dealt with it. I was having horrific, hip pain for a long time. And they summed it up to, oh, my mental illness. Well, if it's not my mental illness, it must be my female organs, and so I was given a hysterectomy at 37 years old, and well, my hip still hurts, later on, they finally did an MRI. I have a torn hip, I didn't need to remove my uterus, and then the same thing happened. I was having seizures, for several couple of years, you know, and they started getting progressively worse. And my PCP was just like, oh, well, it's probably anxiety attacks, you know, it's probably panic attacks, you know, I've had panic attacks and anxiety attacks, and it wasn't a panic or an anxiety attack, you know, but I just felt voiceless and helpless. And I started to where I still to this day, like I'm reluctant to seek medical help, you know, but I eventually pushed and finally seen a neurologist. And last month I was diagnosed with partial complex epilepsy. You know, it was seizures, you know, like, but it's just something so simple, you know, it's like we're not in the you know, the dark ages. We have this diagnostic equipment, you know, and because of my mental illness, I was denied a proper diagnosis. I was just totally dismissed, you know, and it's just so, it just made me feel like so helpless, you know, and like, you know, still to this day, like I'm so reluctant to go to the doctor when I need to go to the doctor, you know, and like, you know, it's even at times made me question my own, you know, body and like, you know, my own medical needs, you know, it's like, you know, is it in my head, you know, but, you know, like, you know, even though there's like physical evidence there, you know, it's like my head doesn't make my legs well, you know, so like, I really think that there.
Lacey, our presenter Ron Bassman wants to say something to you.
Okay, sorry.
No, sorry.
Don't be sorry, Lacey. I'm going to have to leave in a little while, and I just want to say that your story has so much in it, and you're incredible. You're wise, and you've accumulated all this wisdom, you know, from just hard knocks. And I think, you know, I just feel like your experience is terrible. There's no way of saying anything, but it was terrible and it shouldn't have happened to you. And who can explain why things like this happen to people? You know, a lot of people like to say karma or some other thing, but what I think is you are where you are right now, and I'm sure that your knowledge and your emotions and your empathy for people could be really helpful. And I heard you say you're doing some stuff with MindFreedom. Are you working with MindFreedom in Oregon? MindFreedom.
I've been, it's been hard for me to get in touch with them. I've called them quite a bit. I've talked with Jim Flannery via email a little bit. Love that dude. But I did get to go to one of the events at the trauma center before COVID. You know, I went to the I'm a certified peer support specialist, but I'm very much unemployed and like no, I've gone through Project Able to get that in Salem, and I've tried to sign up for volunteer opportunities for that. I haven't worked with MindFreedom at all. I've just been very immersed in your literature and resources.
Are you living in Eugene now, or where are you living?
Yeah, I live in Eugene.
Okay.
I'm doing pretty good. You know, other than like my medical problems. I've been really blessed to be, I'm engaged now. And my fiance is actually, he actually works for disability rights. He works for the Senior Disability Services and is an abuse investigator there. So I've been really blessed to meet someone who can understand disabilities.
I invite you to call Sarah or Kelly if you haven't spoken with them at the office. Let's see what we can do that's helpful, and also how you might help us.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would like to say I've seen someone in the chat asking where I got my training. It's Project Able, and it's in Salem, Oregon. Thank you guys.
So we're on to 3 hours now, And Susan, I don't know if this shuts down at a certain point. I don't know if we.
It doesn't.
Do we have a lot of hands raised?
We're down to having 2 left.
So should we go to the hands and we're gonna get shut down? So let's go to the hands, and if anybody else has a burning desire, just understand we're getting close here. Okay.
Will Grady is back on. Can you get Will on?
Will, you coming through now? Guess not. Okay, Rose, you've been very patient.
Hey, I'm Rose. I was gonna say I'm Rose. I'm an alcoholic. I do a 12-step program for that. I'm also well, I'm a hidden recovery. Let's put it in that terms. Because I am a professional. I've been a bus driver for 3 years. I'm a retired flight attendant. But anyway, it's a pleasure to meet. Years ago, I was a massive drug addict and alcoholic ever since I was like 13. And my parents involuntarily committed me because they didn't know what to do. And it wasn't to a rehab, it was to a psychiatric hospital. And within 10 minutes, I was told I was paranoid schizophrenic and I would have to take this medicine for the rest of my life. And of course, I was in the 4-point strain, face down, and they gave me the shots of the Haldol and my head face twisting off. And then they gave me the Cogentin to get that off of there. And, and then I would go to the outpatient psychiatrist, and I was losing my vision, 20/20 vision at age 17. And they said, well, we can give you something else for that, because it's the Cogentin that's making you lose your, anyway. So my story is really not that tragic. I mean, because I was able to escape very young, I learned to play their game and just to go along with them and get away from them as quick as I can. And just to avoid psychiatrists, but anyway, I've been on a lot of different kinds of psych meds, many, I can name them, but what I'm trying to say is, I don't want to take too much time, but it's real pleasure to be in the room with, I don't know if Jim's still here, Jim Gottstein and Ron Bassman. I just read your book. How wonderful to read your book. And I can totally identify. I got accepted in the master's program at ASU for social work. And, I just ended up declining because I can't be around people that scare me to death. And it's against my morals to sit there and watch all that take place. I hear them talk about being on the committee for people being Baker acted and stuff like that. And there, but for the grace of God, there go I. I have 24 years of sobriety. I work a 12-step program. I lived in a recovery home for 2 years. And, when I came into sobriety, I was on SSI for schizophrenia. And I got into the hands of a therapist who had the book Toxic Psychiatry, Dr. Peter Breggins. And my number one fear is psychiatrists and psychiatric treatment, psychotropic drugs and electric shock therapy and all that stuff. And this doctor just wrapped me in his arms, and he was my one-on-one therapist. And, I'm Christian as well. And he gave me that book. And ever since then, I became a part of it was ICSPP when I first started, when I started becoming a member. And now it's, of course, ISCPP, and then empathic therapy. And then there's so many other ones, that I've gotten involved with, and MindFreedom was one of them. And I've gotten to be an advocate and a what is it? Comfort caller. I didn't have very many, but oh shoot, completely lost my train of thought. Anyway, we did start a group called, Scott Hart is his name. He started a group called Psychiatric Survivors, and I was participating in their groups, and talking about 12-step programs. But a couple of those people committed suicide, and then it was at that point because they were tethering off, and I just thought, well, I can't be a part of that. And so anyway, I appreciate you so much, and I apologize for being in hidden recovery. It's just that I am a professional, and I have been accepted back into the world, and I deny that fact. This is a sacred place where I'm coming out to you, but in public, I don't come out about that. It's very private. I don't. It's bogus as far as I'm concerned. That diagnosis and any of that. So anyway, thanks again.
So one of our rights is that we get to choose who we tell and what we tell. And so I honor you that. We have another hand.
Lisa, who wanted to finish something, she felt cut off before. I don't know if she still wants to say something. Oh, and Athena just raised her hand. So Lisa, did you want to continue? All right, maybe not. Athena.
I was reluctant to talk because I feel very humbled, having not myself been at the other end of the needle. However, 30 years from the time I'm an anthropologist. I've written a lot of articles on the psychiatric survivor movement. I started doing research with NAMI and was horrified that people spoke for other people. And from then on have been much more activist in my focus. I've also been a researcher of dementia care. And when both my mother ended up in a dementia care unit and a very, very close family member ended up with a brilliant, now deceased because of the system, family member became diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I could do nothing to help them. I was not respected, even though I had a PhD and had studied this stuff for 30 years and published more than anybody who ever treated them on either side, and felt so incredibly frustrated. And I think we are dealing with a deeply spiritual problem in this country. I think people don't see the injury. And I think I laud the programs that are attempting to teach caregivers, but I've seen with the nursing home system for 30 years, there have been training programs to try to humanize the people, and it's not changing. And part of it is there's a lack of will, and it's a lack of will both at the government level and at the big farm level and at the institutional level, because there are too many people who are gaining at the suffering of everybody else. And I'm sorry I'm saying this, but I'm really kind of groping with this, having lost a family member. The doctor would not allow me to come into the facility where he was where he was catatonic, but I could reach him, but they only allowed someone in for 1 hour. And because I violated that, because I finally was able to reach him, I was taken out with police. I mean, I'm a professor, I'm a researcher, I have a PhD, but that's nothing. And it shouldn't be anything. It should matter is that this is a human being and I'm an advocate and there is a change happening. So let me stay there to allow, they wanted to send him to, this is a brilliant guy who had achieved much in his life until this late life disorder. But, you know, he ended up dying because he was medicated and then it affected his cognition. And so when he developed cancer, everybody ignored it and thought he had dementia, which was given to him by the medication that he was on, which was an inappropriate medication, Prolixin, which he wouldn't be getting. At any rate, there is something tremendously problematic at the system. I don't know how relenting it is to any kind of change. There's so much resistance on so many levels. And I'm sorry to end it with so much frustration, but I really feel that. And I've written about MindFreedom. I've written about, I mean, I think with everything from David Oakes on and Judy Chamberlain. I was a friend of Ray Unziger's. I missed her deeply. I mean, all these were incredible people. They've been out there. The voices are there, but this system is so unwilling to budge. I don't know how you can change things. I was so touched by Lacey. I mean, the wisdom I'm hearing tonight from so many of you just is amazing. And to think that you've been dismissed just is painful. So.
Athena, this is Ron. I've read your work, and your work on NAMI is the best that has been done, and I've used it in various ways.
Well, thank you.
You have made a difference, and your work is going to endure, and it's really important. And I'm glad that you're here.
So one of the things that I believe that Ron has brought to this organization, and David definitely did, was you don't have to be sorry that you were on the other side of the needle. More importantly, we have to all do together what we know. That's that's one of my big takeaways from this. This is such a diverse group. But I also want to say again, do we have any? And I'm not sure.
Somebody's got none here.
Lisa, I think Lisa is.
Okay.
Did you want to speak again?
Lisa, and also Scott Norman seemed like he didn't know how to raise it or have a hand raise option.
Yeah, Scott's going to be after Lisa, and then I think let Sarah wrap it up.
Perfect, thanks.
Well, Lisa's on mute again. So Scott, go ahead. And Lisa,
I muted her,
so
but
you can go next to Scott.
Oh, I just wanted to, I was apologizing because the reason I kind of just spoke up earlier, because I don't have a hand raising icon here. So I didn't really want to speak again.
Okay. Athena, there's just a request personal to you if you put in your contact information in the chat.
I don't have a website. I keep a low profile. But feel free to contact me. And, I got pulled back into both I just recently retired, but it's like God is saying, no, we need you. So every area of my work, I seem to get, I'm pulled. So I'd be glad to be involved in any way. Let me give you everybody just to make sure.
Be careful what you ask for.
Well, I'm working on a plenary right now until May, but after that.
Was Lisa going to get back on? Who else do we have?
Or no?
We're good?
I muted her, but I can't seem to unmute her.
I just wanted to say I'd be glad to give you my articles and things, and you can have that if that would be helpful.
I'm very interested.
It would be great to be able to post them with your permission on MindFreedom.
Sure. Great.
Love to see myself.
Okay, so I'm not sure what the status is with Lisa. So Sarah, you've been really patient. I know you had a chance to talk before, but you obviously had something more to say. So you want to wrap us up?
I'll give it my best shot. I feel bad for the people that went to the old meeting using the old link, and I was told that there were many people that tried to go to that meeting and didn't know how to get here. So I wanted to first make it clear that thanks to Susan for recording this, we will have the ability to post a recording of this discussion on our website and send you a notification when that takes place. And so if folks want to save their chat, now is probably a good time. I see a lot of people were sharing their emails. So now's the time to follow Susan Fitzmaurice's direction. Go down those little dots down there in your chat window and push save it to your hard drive, the cloud, wherever you prefer. Okay. I think if it's okay, I just, even if Terry Light isn't here anymore, I think he may have left, but he really moved me a lot. I totally honor his work for, advocating for unhoused individuals. He's just been one of my heroes. Jill Kesty is here. She's another one of my heroes. We didn't hear her, but I hope some time soon we can feature her in some way and get her story out there. What I wanted to comment in relation to Terry Light, he said something about his adolescence and his upbringing. And I wanted to, that moved me. And then Sam, Sam, who's with us still, made a comment in the chat saying, yeah, psychiatrists, shut down. If the minute you show any emotion, they shut you down. And that made me remember something that Ron, our new executive director at MindFreedom, has been very keen to promote, which is an educational initiative targeting parents. And the reason I totally am behind that is I identify with being kind of an unskillful parent, not abusive per se, but just unskillful. And if I had just a tiny bit of the education that survivors of the mental health system gave me on the fly, including my mentor, David Oakes, and people too numerous to mention, I would have made a different set of decisions that may have saved my child from a lot of harm and grief. There are other ways in the medical model of looking at how a person, reacts to trauma and stress and abuse. And I just so think that although for some NAMI parents, it may come as a real relief to see a loved one's state of mind as being the result of a chemical imbalance. For me as a parent, viewing my daughter in that reductionist kind of way felt very disempowering. It took whatever tiny little bit of influence I had completely off the table and gave the power to someone else. And yes, I agree with the person who said that we have figured out a way to monetize people's suffering. This giving people community support should not be monetized, because we all help each other. When we build our community, we are helping ourselves. So that is not a transactional thing. That is a way of life, a way of living that we promote here at MindFreedom through connecting people, the power of building communities, the power of peer support. But if we're monetizing on it, it gets a little fuzzy. So I would want to say that I'm really a total believer in parent education, because the gateway to a lot of psychiatric abuse is parents and family members. And so we've got to take a different message to parents who are colluding with psychiatry for a one-size-fits-all model of quote-unquote mental illness. And there is no one-size-fits-all. The experts by experience are the people I'm interested in hearing, not so much experts by training. No offense, Athena and every other mental health provider who's been a part of this conversation. No offense to you, Ron. I know I love the fact that you're smart enough to get a PhD. I couldn't even come close. I barely graduated from U of O, State College. You get a BA, but so I respect people with greater education than me. But in this situation, the person needs to be the expert on their own care and treatment. And we need to herald the whole concept of supported decision-making. And Susan, I'm totally backing you up, girl, 100%. We got to get these stories of the legislators. I just started coming out of the closet. I had my first experience talking to a legislator last week. And I feel like I got my say, but his response was, well, you're the exception, not the rule. The overwhelming number of parents who come to me, they say, oh, the mental health system saved my life, rah, rah, rah. Well, where are all the voices of the people? It's happening now. I'm not gonna. If you're helped by that mental health system, great. You have that freedom to make that voluntary choice, and I'm happy for you. But a lot of people are voiceless because they're physically not able to travel, to speak up, to access technology, to go to town hall meetings. So we have got to, those of us who are allies, we have got to start getting busing and transportation and access to computers for people who are voiceless. And we have to create systems of making people heard. So I want to end this up by thanking Susan for doing a stellar job making this accessible for hearing impaired people, which includes my husband. So thank you for the excellent transcription. It was flawless. And so thank you for recording it. I will definitely do everything in my power to get this posted as soon as possible. So thank you to also Susan Musante. Thank you for being on our board of directors, and thank you for doing the difficult task of facilitating. You did an awesome job.
And thank you. And I want to say the people we're not hearing from, some of them are dying and some of them are hiding.
Right on. That's right.
That's the only way they got there, you know? So
real quick, who should, could you give me an email that I should send anything to any of my material to that might be helpful? Who's the
Office-
person I should
The
point
office at
person?
mindfreedom.org.
I'm sorry?
Office at
I heard you. Okay.
mindfreedom.org.
I'll do that. Thank you.
I did this a little late, but I just wrote my email and my website, which I have an article on families.
Ooh.
If anybody's interested, I wrote it about probably 7-8 years ago as part of INTAR. So if you've already downloaded the chat, to find my website, it's www.ronaldbassman.com. And you can download articles from there that I've written, and you can get in touch with me.
So I'm a dope and I don't know how to download the chat. I tried. So I'm hoping one of you will help me after the fact. That's all I'll say.
You can't, I'll say that I can
You can't
send
do
it
it
to you.
afterwards. You have to do it while the session's still going on.
Oh, I can't find it. Did everybody else find it? Am I the only
I
one?
can send it to you, but down in
I
the
can't
right.
find it. I can't
Lower
find.
right-hand
it.
Thank you, Jim.
little